Բարերեգոս սիրելի արտագիստներ, ինչպես խոստացանք այս շաբաթ պիտի ունենանք շատ կարևոր հյուրը Իլինոյզեն այսօր մեզ հետ կմիանայինք հեռախոսով եւ պիտի ունենանք իրեն այդ հարցազրույցը այդ քիրքի մասին, որ ինքը նախապատրաստած է եւ բավականին լուրջ հարցեր կան այդ քիրքի մեջ հрьяաներու ցեղասպանությունը հայ քրիստոնյաներուն այդ քիրքի վերաբերյալ այդ քիրքի հեղինակը եւ ռիսերչերը եւ հիստորիանը Christopher Jon Bjerknes հավասիկ պիտի խոսենք իրեն հետ եւ շատ պիտի չի երկար introduce-ն եմ պիտի հասնենք որովհետեւ հերախոսի վրա է long distance եւ մեզ հետ ինքը պիտի միանա. Good evening, Christopher. How are you?
Very good, Bedros. How are you?
I'm going to basically introduce you to the audience. Christopher Jon Bjerknes. That's it. Thank you for taking our invitation to talk to us on live TV, first of all. I know it is 3 hours ahead in Illinois right now. So thank you for this special time that you gave us to the Armenian and to our audience.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and it's an honor to appear on your program.
I would like to start with a little bit background of you. Basically, how did you become interested in writing such a book about the Armenians, you being an American?
I began by investigating Albert Einstein and studying the history of the theory of relativity. And I came to the conclusion that Einstein was a plagiarist. And I looked into his background and discovered that he was also a Zionist. And in studying Zionism, it led me into studying Jewish crimes against humanity and crypto-Judaism. And all of that, through a circuitous route, took me to the Armenian genocide. And I mentioned it in my book on Einstein's plagiarism called The Manufacture and Sale of St. Einstein. And when I published that book, I received many requests for more information about the Jewish involvement in the Armenian genocide. So I decided to write a book about that as well, and I put that up on the web.
And
I started putting that up on the web back in October of last year.
Have you had any threats about it or basically discriminating phone calls about the book that you wrote?
I've received death threats which are general, not specifically related to the Armenian genocide.
So basically you've received death threats about the topics that you talk about?
Yes, I write extensively about Zionism and the threat that it poses to Americans and to the world generally, and I write extensively about Jewish history.
And in the book, I would like to basically, I would like you to start talking about the book when you came to a conclusion to write about the Armenian genocide. You have some information about Amalekites in the book, starting from page 96. Could you elaborate on solid information and proofs on that?
In the Hebrew Bible, there are many passages which state that the Jews have a mortal enemy whom they call Amalek, and it is for them a racial belief that there is a tribe of Amalekites who are out to destroy the Jews, and God has commanded the Jews to completely exterminate the Amalekites down to the last man, woman, and child. They cannot leave a single Amalekite left alive. And when I began looking into that Jewish belief system, I found many writings in the Hebrew Bible, in the Jewish Talmud, and in Jewish Kabbalistic writings where it expressly states that in order for the Jewish people to receive redemption, in order for them to have their Messiah come and be restored in Palestine and build the Jewish temple, they have to exterminate the Amalekites. And the Jewish people associated the Armenians with the Amalekites. They believe that the Armenian people represent this racial enemy of the Jews which has to be exterminated. And there were many side issues that relate to that. The Armenians were the first nation to become Christians, and the Jews have always waged a war against Christianity. And that also played into it. And it is an absolute religious commandment for Jews that they have to exterminate the Amalekites, which means that they have to exterminate the Armenians.
Is it until the modern days, until the starting of 1900s? I mean, what kind of solid writings they have that we could associate with the Armenian genocide?
Yes, it is. It's a very modern belief, and it's a belief that is passed along to different people whom the Jewish people associate as their enemy. In the Bible, it says that God will have a war with Amalek from generation to generation. And at the specific time of the Armenian genocide, both in the phase that took place from 1894 to 1896 and at the height of the genocide in 1915, we have contemporary writings in Hebrew in Jewish publications where they call the Armenians the Amalekites. And they state that they have no mercy for them because they are the Amalekites. And you can find this in Yair Oran's book, Zionism and the Armenian Genocide, The Banality of Indifference. And you can also find it in Elliot Horowitz's book, which I believe is called Reckless Rights. And you can find it in the Encyclopedia Judaica under Armenians, and also in the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia under Armenians.
And basically, could you elaborate how did they make it possible to basically make their vision, enable their vision to basically do the mass murder of Armenians?
Well, that gets into the Turkish Empire. And the Turkish Empire in the period of the 1890s, which is also the same period that political Zionism took root in the writings of Pinsker and Theodor Herzl, the Zionist Jews had a stronghold within the Turkish Empire in the Salonican Jewish community, where there were many Jewish bankers and Jewish Freemasons who were organizing a revolt against the Turkish Empire. Because one of the chief goals of Zionism was to break apart the Turkish Empire so that they could take Palestine from the Arabs and give it to European Jews. And they also had to destroy the Russian Empire because the majority of European Jews lived in Russia, and Russia would not let the Jews go because they knew it would result in economic hardships. So they engineered the First World War in order to break apart the Russian Empire and break apart the Turkish Empire. And they could engineer the First World War by pitting Christians against Muslims. And they decided that one way they could pit Christians against Muslims was to have the Sultan start killing Armenians. And they did that by convincing the Sultan that it was the Armenians who were going to conduct a revolution against the Sultan, and that the Christians were plotting to destroy the Turkish Empire. And so the Sultan began committing atrocities in the Balkans and in Turkey itself, and that started to create an outrage in England and America against Islam. Christians started to become pitted against Muslims.
Right.
Then the Salonican Jews, through their Committee of Union and Progress and meeting in Freemasonic lodges, there was a man named Emmanuel Carasso, who was the Grand Master of the Macedonian Resorta Masonic Lodge in Salonika. And they, through funding, through Italian banking Jews, and ultimately through the Rothschild bankers of the City of London, fomented a revolution against the Sultan, which began, I think, in June of 1908, and they finally deposed the Sultan in 1909. And they then started committing heinous atrocities against Christians in the Balkans, and specifically against the Armenians, in order to use that to cause the Christians to want to wage war against the Turkish Empire. And that resulted in the Balkan Wars. And then the Balkan Wars resulted in World War I. And in World War I, the leaders of the so-called Young Turks were actually all crypto Jews from Salonika. And the chief of those was Talat Pasha. And Talat Pasha instituted a program of extermination of the Armenians in order to bring America and England into the region as Christian saviors of the Armenians. And they also attacked Russia because Russia had traditionally been a strong defender, especially of Greek Christians in the Turkish Empire. And in this way, they were able to foment the First World War. And another motivation they had to kill the Armenians was the fact that the Armenians were at that time considered the most intelligent and most successful group of people on the face of the earth. And the Jews wanted to take over their businesses and their residences and give them to Russian Jews who would emigrate into the region, eventually pushing them into Palestine. So they wanted to get rid of a business competitor, and that would also contribute to the destruction of the Turkish Empire, which they sought, because the Armenians were often statesmen and controlled the bureaucracy of the Turkish Empire, and the Turks were very inefficient, but the Armenians were very intelligent and were very successful. They were the best doctors, the best lawyers throughout the Turkish Empire. And by killing off the Armenians, they ensured the ultimate destruction of the Turkish Empire.
And I would like to go back. You talked about Salonika. Where did the initial movement start of these crypto Jews who came to Salonika, basically?
Jews had a very strong foothold in the Spanish Empire, and they had very good relations with Spanish Catholics. And whenever the Jewish people settle in an area, they start to tend to have good relations with the native people, and Jewish leaders don't like that because it leads to Jewish assimilation. And Jewish leaders try to keep Jews segregated from Christians and from other people so that they can preserve the Jewish race until the time of the Messianic age, when they believe the Jewish Messiah will come and redeem the Jewish people and deliver them to Jerusalem and to Palestine. So the Jewish leaders orchestrated in 1492, the same year that they tried to send ships to America to create a homeland for the Jews, but that was unsuccessful. So they expelled the Jews from Spain, and many of the Jews from Spain went to Salonika, Greece, or Macedonia, and settled there. Other Jews remained in the Spanish Empire, and they had a choice to either convert to Christianity or die or leave. Those were their three options. So those Jews who remained in Spain, many of them pretended to be Catholics, and they would pretend to be the most ardent Catholics. You could always identify them by the fact that they were the most religious Catholics. But in secret, they would continue to practice Judaism. And another event that took place within the Turkish Empire itself is around 1666, there was a Jewish man named Shabbatai Sevi, who thought that he was the coming of the Jewish Messiah and that he would redeem the Jewish people and restore them to Palestine. This, of course, incurred the wrath of the Sultan, who did not want the Jews to take over his empire. So he latched on to Shabbatai Sevi and insisted that he convert to Islam or he'd cut his head off. And Shabbatai Sevi pretended to convert to Islam so that he could subvert the religion from within. And many of his followers pretended to convert to Islam. And like the supposedly Catholic Jews of Spain, they were often the most ardently religious Islamic people in the Turkish Empire, even though in secret they would remain Jews. And they would even not tell their children that they were Jews until they reached a certain age. I think it was 13 or 18.
Right.
And this formed a cult in Salonika. And Shabbatai Sevi, when he died, Jews believe that the souls can be reincarnated like the Buddhists believe, especially within this sect of Judaism, which to be known as the Durnmei. And they believe that the soul of Shabbatai Sevi passed on to a man named Baruch Yah Russo. And Baruch Yah Russo established a Durnmei cult in Salonika, Greece. Now, these Jews were heavily into the Lurian Kabbalah, which is a subversive movement that instituted communism and other forms of revolution. And these were the leaders of the revolutionary movements throughout Europe and ultimately in the Turkish Empire. And they used as their model to destroy the Turkish Empire what a Jew in Italy was doing named Giuseppe Mazzini. And Giuseppe Mazzini tried to subvert the Kingdom of Sardinia in Italy with Freemasonic lodges in which he instituted what he called the Young Italians, Young Italy.
Right.
And he also established the Carbonari, and they were secret societies that tried to overthrow the Kingdom of Sardinia and solve the Italian question. And he joined the Crimean War on the side of Turkey, England, and France, excuse me, in the hopes that at the end of that war there would be a peace conference, as there always is at the end of the war, and he could raise the issue of the Italian question and solve it at that peace conference. Now, the Zionist Jews following Theodor Herzl planned the First World War in the hopes that they could break up the Turkish Empire, free up Palestine, and break up the Russian Empire and free up the Jews of Russia to move to Palestine. And they hoped that at the end of that war there would be peace conferences. And when the empires were broken up, all the small peoples could petition to have their own states formed. And they promised the Armenians that if the Armenians sacrificed themselves after the First World War, the Armenians would be able to form an independent Republic of Armenia. And they also said that the Jews would be able to form an independent Judea in Palestine.
Right.
And that was the purpose of the First World War, was to break up all these empires so that all the small peoples would form racially and ethnically segregated small nations throughout the region, and then the Jews would be safe when they moved to Palestine, because they feared that if they simply bought Palestine from the Sultan, as the Rothschilds had offered to do, that the Arabs, especially Egyptian Arabs, would turn against them and fight against them, and the Catholic Church would view them as the Antichrist and would crush them. So they had to be more clever about it. And one of the reasons that they wanted to give that it was necessary for the Jews to do this, to form a nation in Palestine, was the fact that small ethnicities were subject to genocides and persecutions. And they themselves committed genocide against the Armenians to set the example for the world that it was necessary for the Jews to form a nation so that this would not happen to them.
So basically, we could say Armenians were sacrificed and to basically form a Jewish state. Is that what we're trying to get to?
That's exactly correct. And the word that was used long before the European Holocaust was Holocaust, which means a burnt offering or a sacrifice. And in the literature from the 1890s through about 1939, the Armenian genocide was often referred to in the express terms that it was a Holocaust, a burnt offering. And you had traitors among the Armenian people, especially in the Armenian church and in Armenians' relations with Britain, which was controlled by the Rothschild interests, who were Zionist Jewish bankers. You had Armenians who were willing to sacrifice Armenians in order to bring this about. They were willing to sacrifice 1.5 million of their own people so that at the end of the war they would be given an independent nation. And I'm sure many of them were themselves crypto-Jews. And there was a Reverend Philion, I think was his name, who wrote amazing prophecies around 1895 and 1896.
Could you repeat the name again, please?
I think it was Philion, Filian. It's certainly in my book. And this man specifically said that there would be a Battle of Armageddon, which was the First World War, and that there would be large massacres of Armenians far exceeding anything that had happened up to that point, which was 1896, I believe. So it was obviously all planned out, and it worked very well for the Jews, except for the fact that the Jews of Europe didn't want to go to Palestine at the end of the war. But all the things that they anticipated would happen, they actually brought about. They destroyed the Russian people in the same way that they destroyed the Turkish people with Freemasonic Jews who subverted the government and overthrew it. But the Armenians got shortchanged at the end of the war. They had a short-lived republic, I think, from 1918 or 1919 to 1920.
21.
But there again, the crypto Jews who took over the Turkish Empire turned against the Armenians and attacked them as they were forming their independent nation and sandwiched them between Ataturk, Kemal, Mustafa Kemal, who was also a Salonican crypto Jew, chased the Armenians up until the provinces which had previously been controlled by the Russians, and essentially went to war with Russia, and which was then Soviet Russia, which was controlled by Trotsky, who was another crypto-Jew whose real name was Lev Bronstein. And the resolution of that was that Armenians were forced to give up their sovereignty or continue to fight the Turks and again face genocide. So they elected to become a Soviet republic of the Soviet Empire that the crypto-Jews of Russia manufactured. And by doing that, the Armenians then slowly lost all their religion, all their culture, all their ties to their wonderful heritage. They went from being the best educated, most intellectual, most creative artists in the world to being a very impoverished Soviet republic. And all of that was by design.
Of course, communism would destroy somebody one's intellectual ideas and basically understanding, because it was prepared to destroy the mind and equalize as equal to other people, basically.
And it was also designed to destroy the intelligentsia. And the Armenians were the intelligentsia of both Russia and the Turkish Empire. So they were the first obvious targets of these Kabbalistic Jewish revolutions. They wanted to weaken their enemies as great as possible, and they wanted to prevent any counter-revolutions. And the Armenians, since they were the most intelligent, sophisticated, cultured people, were the most likely to be counter-revolutionaries. So that was another motivation that the Jews had to wipe out the Armenians. And they also tried to destroy Islam. The Young Turkish Revolution was a positivistic revolution, very much like the Bolshevik Revolution. It tried to replace religion with worship of the government, and it tried to replace culture with science. And those were consistent themes in both the Young Turk Revolution, which was actually a Jewish takeover of the Turkish Empire, and the Russian Revolution, which was actually a Jewish takeover of Russia. They immediately exterminated the intelligentsia, and they replaced religion with state worship and culture with science.
I'm going to have to put you on hold. I'm going to take one phone call, and I will translate you whatever the question is.
Okay.
Are you listening, says?
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, hi. I've been studying Armenian history on my own.
Could you speak louder, please?
I got a different point of view, as you know, he does too. Ancient Armenia, it came during the time before, you know, Turkey was existed. It came the time before, the time during Persian, you know, invented fire worshipping, even way before Christianity, before the Jews and all that kind of stuff, you know? Original Armenia began around Iran and all the way down to Turkey and to the Arab nations. So many cultures have conquered us, and, you know, it's just the fact that we're still around is a good thing. But the fact I'm trying to make is that all these destroyed and stolen our land, like the Arabs, the Persians, the Turkish, and the Russians, they've stolen so much land and they never gave it back. And they should give all our lands back, the Arabs, the Persians, and the Turkish.
Okay, what is your question? Can you get to the question, please?
I'm saying there needs to be some reparation from all these cultures destroying our Christian lands and all these Muslims taking over, and especially the Russians too. Or else I think the Armenians should start a war with all these Arabs and Persians and Turkish, get our lands back and expand the empire again, because they're stealing from us too.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm back. I'm sorry. It's just an opinion somebody was giving. It's not a question. I'm going to basically keep the question to you. I'm going to basically keep on asking you the questions. What role did Freemasonry have besides the crypto Jews in the Armenian genocide, as you research?
Freemasonry was very significant, and here we enter into the plan that was revealed in the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which I must say many people assert was a forgery, and in general in the academic community is considered a forgery. But it made amazing predictions which came true in both the so-called Young Turk Revolution and in the Bolshevik Revolution. And at the time that both of those events took place, many people, including many governments, investigated the protocols and concluded that they were in fact true. Now these Masonic, Judeo-Masonic revolutionary schemes went way back, and there was a man in France named...
you're saying, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you one more time. You're saying Judeo-Masonic. Could you make it plain? I would like to understand it more clearer. What do you mean by Judeo-Masonic?
Well, let's investigate what Freemasonry is. Freemasonry is a setup of lodges and secret societies in which powerful people are able to recruit people and learn all their personal secrets and compromise people. They were also places where intellectuals could express secret and scientific ideas which were either forbidden by the government or frowned upon. For example, they could be openly atheistic in Freemasonic lodges, so that attracted a lot of that kind of people. But the fundamental purpose of the Masonic lodges and the reason why Jews became intimately involved in them was that it afforded them the opportunity to create revolutions. There were Jewish Masonic societies founded in America immediately before the American Revolution, and they were heavily involved in it. There were Jewish Masonic institutions established in France immediately before the French Revolution.
Are you talking about like such as B'nai B'rith and similar to?
B'nai B'rith was patterned after Freemasonry, but it came a little bit later. That was, I think, about 50 years after what I'm talking about, maybe a couple decades less than that. But again, in the French Revolution, you had descendants of Jacob Frank, who was another Jewish king who believed that he was the Messiah and had inherited the soul of Shabbatai Tzvi, which is in the mind of this cult of Jews, at the actual soul of God.
Jacob Frank happened to be Satanist, I believe.
Well, that's another aspect of Judaism that many people don't understand, is that Judaism is a dualistic belief. They believe that both evil and good come from God. And they cite passages in the Talmud such as Sanhedrin Folio 97a. There are passages in Job and passages in Isaiah which specifically state that both evil and good come from God. So they believe that in order for them to attain ultimate power and to be most godlike, they have to practice both evil and good. And they also believe that in order for the Jewish Messiah to arrive and take over the world, they have to convert the whole world to evil, so that God will be forced to come down and cleanse the world. And he will cleanse the world by bringing the Jewish Messiah. So when you say that Jacob Frank was a Satanist, it's more than that. It's that he tried to make the world degenerate in order to provoke God to cleanse the world.
Okay.
And he would practice incest and have weird, wild sexual parties, and he infiltrated himself into the Polish government in that way. And the Frankish Jews took over the government and the Catholic Church of Poland and destroyed Poland, which was at one time an enormous empire and highly influential in European affairs. And that was the methods that they used, is that they would pretend to be another religion and another people. They would pretend to be Polish Catholics to take over Poland. They would pretend to be English Protestants to take over England. They would pretend to be Turkish Muslims to take over Turkey.
Now, in your research, have you done any research on, have you come to any conclusion on American missionaries in Armenia who were very much infiltrated by Freemasonry, who were there to do more Freemasonry job than Christian job?
I've seen that more among the British. The American Christian missionaries, in my research, I've seen were used in order to provoke paranoia in the Sultan. The Jewish bankers would whisper in the Sultan's ear that missionaries were trying to subvert the Turkish Empire and would conduct a Christian revolution that would destroy Islam. And that made the Sultan very paranoid, and that was what provoked him to start attacking Christians in the Turkish Empire. As far as infiltration, yes, there were Zionists who were involved with Lord Palmerston and other British Zionists, and I'm sure the same was going on with Americans because there was a strong Zionist movement in America at that time as well. And what you say makes sense. I haven't researched it personally. I've seen other articles on it where they discussed it. But we also had other Zionist infiltrators in the Young Turk Revolution, such as Vladimir Zhabotinsky, who founded revisionist Zionism, was working as a propagandist in the Young Turk Revolution. And another very influential Freemasonic infiltrator was a man who went under the code name Parvis, whose real name was Alexander Israel Nazarovich Helfand. And he funded Trotsky and arranged for Trotsky and Lenin to travel to Russia in order to take over the Russian Revolution and hand it over to the Bolshevik Revolution in the October Revolution. He was heavily involved in that. He was also involved in the 1905 Russian Revolution, and he was another propagandist within the Young Turk movement for wars and for what they called, I think, Turkization, where they would try to make the entire empire Muslim and Turkish, and in so doing swat the Christians in the nose in the Balkans to provoke the Balkan Wars.
So, I'm
As
sorry.
a result of that, the Armenians really suffered because they were Christian.
So, going back to the question of Freemasonry and Judaism, basically, if somebody is in a Freemasonry lodge and he belongs to Freemasonry, the same meetings were done before the genocide by the Young Turks and the Armenians in the Freemasonic lodges. Are we trying to come to a conclusion that some of the Armenian leaders were Freemasons then?
I would say absolutely. They were not only Freemasons, they had also their own independent revolutionary movements. I forget the name, the Dashnak and the, who was the other one? Starts with an H.
Hunchak.
Hunchakanians, something like that.
Hunchakian, right.
And they became infiltrated by the Jewish Masonic revolutionaries who were centered out of Salonika, Greece, and who produced Emmanuel Karasto, Javid Bai, Talat Pasha, Enver Pasha. All of the prominent leaders of the Committee of Union and Progress who conducted the revolution, deposed the Sultan, and committed the most atrocious period of the Armenian genocide, especially in 1915. And the way they would phrase their orders matched exactly the Jewish commandments in the Hebrew Bible on how the Jews should exterminate the Amalekites and how they should blot out their name forever. Their orders would read almost verbatim as if they had been taken out of the Hebrew Bible, which I find very telling. And I should also point out that the Muslims resisted what these crypto-Jewish Young Turks were telling them to do, and that they had a difficult time getting the Turkish Muslims to wipe them out, and they would often try to invoke the Kurds to slaughter the Armenians because the Kurds were poorer and were more apt to do it. And they did that by promising the Kurds and the Turks all the property they could steal from the Armenians. And the Armenians were the richest community in the Turkish Empire. They even exceeded the wealth of the Greeks and the Jews. Not at the top level. The Jewish bankers were the wealthiest people in the world. But the Armenian people as a whole were wealthier than the Jews within the Turkish Empire and within the Russian Empire.
The next question I'd like to come to is, what are you willing to publish your book, the book that you wrote? And of course, it's 543 pages, I believe. And when is it that you wrote that book, and how long it's been on the internet?
I began writing that book, I believe, sometime, probably in August of 2006. I think I put up the first chapter in October, and I'm certain I had it finished by the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
My motivation at the time was to prompt other research, because within my book I cite many sources which have not yet been explored. For example, the correspondence that took place in the London Times in 1911 when the crypto-Jewish Young Turks slaughtered the Armenians in Adana. And there's very extensive correspondence that was published in the London Times at that time in 1911, where they identify all the Young Turk leaders as Jews, and they plead with the Jews in England to try to stop what is taking place, because they knew that ultimately what the Jewish atrocities against the Armenians would result in a backlash against Jews worldwide. And a very similar correspondence took place in the Jewish Chronicle and in the London Times after the Bolshevik Revolution, where people were pleading with British Jews and Western Jews to repudiate what the Russian Jews like Trotsky were doing in Russia, because they were afraid that ultimately there would be a terrible backlash, and they even said a Holocaust of the Jews if they didn't do it. And they were exactly right, because Nazism, one of the forces that Nazism used to turn people against Jewish people and to cause them to hate them, was the example of the millions that the Bolshevik Jews slaughtered within the Russian Empire.
And have you had, since you published it on the internet, have you had any support by the Armenian community?
You're the first.
So nobody was interested so far?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, I don't think it's going to be the last.
Well, thank you. I hope so, because I think it's very important. This portrays the black aspect of Armenian history, but it also reflects, I think, the most wonderful period of Armenian history, which immediately preceded the genocide, when the Armenians flowered within the Turkish Empire and contributed so much to the general culture of the world. And I hope that Armenians can recapture that culture and realize what was deliberately done to them to destroy that culture, so that they can start to heal the wounds and protect themselves from any future attacks. Because it appears that the Zionists are again trying to provoke a war in the region, again utilizing the Kurds by promising, as they promised the Armenians, an independent nation after World War III. They're telling the Kurdish people, and there are documented by the BBC, Mossad agents operating in the Kurdish region of Iraq, training them to provoke the Turks to then attack the Kurds. And they promised them that at the end of this Middle Eastern-inspired World War III, that the Kurds will finally be able to form an independent Kurdistan, and that Israel will expand into greater Israel from the Nile to the Euphrates and will serve to protect the Kurds from other Muslims. And it's a very dangerous situation. And another motivation for me to write this book was to expose how World War I was instigated by Zionist Jews, how World War II was instigated by Zionist Jews, which I go more deeply into in my book, The Manufacture and Sale of St. Einstein, in order to make people aware of how these machinations come about and how we can keep them from happening. And a good example in modern history is what the Zionists did to Lebanon to destroy that beautiful country by pitting the Christians against the Muslims with false flag terrorism. Mossad agents would go up into Lebanon and pretend to be Sunni Muslims and shoot Shiite Muslims and shoot Christians, and then they would pretend to be Christian Lebanese and shoot Shia Muslims and shoot Sunni Muslims in order to create a civil war and to pit Christians against Muslims and Muslims against one another. And the same process, I'm sure, well, it's been proven, is happening within Iraq itself, where you have the Kurds in the north, the Sunnis in the southwest, and the Shia in the southeast, and you have Zionists pitting these people against one another in order to create a conflagration where they'll be able to draw Turkey, Syria, and Iran into a broader war. And all of this is being done so that Israel can expand its boundaries and so that it can break and balkanize all these large nations into smaller nations, which it will have an easy time controlling.
And I'm going to have to put you on hold because I'm getting a lot of phone calls. I'm going to take one phone call. Are you going to sing? Are you?
Yes. Hi. I just wanted to first of all, I just tuned in. I have no idea who's talking, but I want to thank him for educating us on this topic. It's a very important topic. And I just have a question. Is he in any way worried about, spreading this news or anything? Like, is his life in danger?
I can ask him that. He had published. It's on the internet. I can ask him that, and you can stay online and listen to that answer.
Oh.
Christopher, I'm back.
Yes.
The question was, thank you very much for publishing this. And are you scared of your life for this?
I take precautions. I'm aware of the danger, and whatever my fate is will be.
God will protect you.
I'm far more frightened of World War III and the destruction of humanity than I am concerned about myself in a selfish way. And if what I say is wrong, then I hope that people will bring forth what they believe to be that I have said that they think is wrong, and we can discuss it in a civilized way. I know that there have been smear campaigns against me, and there have been threats against me, and that is typical of what happens when you expose these things. But I think the information is out, and that is my best protection. For example, coming on your show, and if I may, I'd like to give the website where people can download the book for free.
Sure.
It is JewishRacism.com, as if Jewish racism were one word, JEWISHRACISM.com. And there they'll be able to download both my books, The Jewish Genocide of Armenian Christians and The Manufacture and Sale of St. Einstein, where I go very deeply into the processes by which Zionist Jews have created revolutions worldwide. And again, I'd like to go back to that very influential Zionist Jew who went under the name of Parvis, whose real name was Alexander Israel Lazarovich Helfin.
Are you saying with a P like Paul?
Yes, Parvus.
Paros, yes.
He was very famous for his dealings with Lenin and Trotsky in the Russian Revolution, and also for his dealings in the Young Turk Revolution. And he created the idea of permanent revolution, which the crypto Jew Leon Trotsky, who was born Lev Bronstein, adopted as permanent revolution and world revolution. And we today in America are being misled by the descendants of these Trotskyite Jews who, for example, Urban Crystal, who have morphed this idea of permanent revolution into the modern neoconservative movement of permanent war and permanent regime change. Now, when they say regime change, it's really code for revolution. And they are trying to instigate permanent war in the Middle East and permanent revolution, which will eventually, of necessity, touch upon the Armenian community in the Middle East, not only in Armenia, but throughout the Middle East, in Iran and in Lebanon and in other parts of Syria as well. And this is an extension of the Trotskyite ideal that was started by Parvis of permanent revolution. And there's a direct lineage of Jewish families that go back. And you had Leo Strauss was involved in formulating this philosophy, and Schachtman was another one who was involved in formulating this philosophy. But it all began with a propagandist who was heavily involved in the Young Turk Revolution at one time.
The next question, until today, the United States government has not acknowledged or has not even recognized the Armenian genocide. Could you elaborate who has been against it? I'm sure Christians have not been against it.
No, Christians have not been against it. My understanding is that bills have come up from time to time to establish a resolution acknowledging the genocide, and they have been opposed by Jewish organizations. I believe the ADL and AIPAC has exerted its influence to keep this from happening. And the United States is not unique. I think in Israel, Tzipi Livni and others have opposed resolutions acknowledging the genocide and have opposed Turkey's being forced to acknowledge the genocide. Now, why would Jews be opposed to that? One reason would be that they want to keep the Holocaust of European Jewry as a unique event in history and have a selfish interest that way. But I think a more substantial fact is that when people start digging into this Armenian genocide, it's inevitable that they will discover that all the leaders of the Young Turk, all the significant leaders of the Young Turks, were Jews from Salonika, and that it was a Zionist Jewish movement to sacrifice the Armenians for the sake of establishing a Jewish state in Palestine, which the Jews had no right to do.
The Zionist movement, the founder was Herzl, as we know. Wasn't it at one point, didn't he convert to Catholic religion, Christian?
I've heard stories like that, and I've heard that he repudiated the Zionist movement shortly before he died. I think he died either in 1904 or 1905, I think 1904. But Herzl was, again, basically a front man for the Jewish bankers. The Zionist movement actually predates Herzl, and Herzl was used as a tool.
Right.
Because, as I said before, the Zionists were afraid that if they moved hastily into Palestine, they would face several obstacles. The Arabs, not necessarily the Turks, but the Arab Muslims would oppose them and consider them al-Dajjal, the Antichrist, and the Catholic Church would oppose them as being the Antichrist, and the Jews themselves didn't want to go. And the Rothschilds, even back in the early 1800s, were calling for a Zionist movement. And they had to take away the idea that it was a religious movement. That's why they created the idea of political Zionism. But you see rabbis today going back and showing that Herzl and all the others were secretly simply fulfilling Jewish messianic religious prophecies in a political way. And this was established as a formal idea by Moses Hess in, I think, 1862 in his book, Rome and Jerusalem, in which he asserted the idea that the Jewish people itself has to act as the Jewish Messiah and restore itself to Palestine. And Hess predicted in that time that there would be a race war between the Germans and the Slavs, and that could be used to create an environment in which the Jews could restore themselves to Palestine. And he also created the idea of National Socialism as a racial theory, which was adopted by the Nazis. Nazi ideology is a direct product of Zionist ideology.
And the other question I like to have, which it's not about the genocide, in your book you have a unique part where it says the Armenians are the chosen people. Where did you come to that conclusion? What kind of solid facts do you have?
I think you're quoting from Reverend Filion. He's actually the one who said that the Jews were the chosen people, and then the Armenians became the chosen people because they were the first Christians.
Right.
And also that Mount Ararat is in Armenia,
right,
and that the Garden of Eden, in his deduction, was in Armenia, and that the Battle of Armageddon, in his conclusions, would take place in Armenia. But I think what he was doing, he was actually a Zionist agent who was setting up the Armenians to sacrifice themselves for the sake of the Jews and for the sake of an Armenian nation at the end of the Battle of Armageddon. It was a trap.
I'm going to put you on hold one more time. Are you listening?
Hello, Bedros Hajian, ishvesek.
Եկ քիչ բարձր եթե կարող եք։
Ishvesek, լավ եք։
Լավ, park ասո։
Շատ ներողություն, ինչ է այս բարոնի անունը եւ իր բժշկինը։
Christopher Jon Bjerknes, Big Bjerknes, B.O.
Այո, դա ներողություն, այդ Իրանից հարցնեք, որ այս Nikolai Sarkozyn, որ ընտրվել է, versus Hungarian բան ունի, background ունի։
Չեմ հասկանում որ հարցումը։
Nikolai Sarkozyn, որ ընտրվել է Ֆրանսիայի նախագահը, ուրեմն հունգարացի հրյայի բան ունի, ինչպես ասեմ, Հունգարիայի հրյաների պատմության մեջ կա այդ հունգարացի հրյա պետք է լինի իր հայրը կամ իր մայրի կողմից, կարծեմ մոր կողմից։ Ամենայն դեպս կարելի է խնդրեմ ասեք, ում շահին կլինի, կամ ով է ավելի շատ, այսինքն օգտվում այդ իր ընտրությունից, որ ընտրվեց, ում շահին կլինի, որ երկիրը ավելի, այսինքն
Եկեք այսօր մեր ցեղասպանության հարցերով սպանենք, նյութը արդեն կփոխվի, որ ուրիշ տեղ երթագոր։ Okay, Christopher, I'm back again with the same topic. Thank you for being patient with us. We have 5 more minutes left for our topic. I would like you to I'm going to give you the time to talk for 2 minutes, give your opinion, and basically I want you to tell the Armenian community what's next, what should we do next.
The Armenian community has a very unique history and a very wonderful history, as well as this black spot on that beautiful history. And I hope that the Armenian community again views themselves as a people who are intellectual, who are spiritual, and who have an inner strength and a beauty that was widely recognized at one time as being the finest on the face of the earth. And I hope that the Armenian community can become cohesive and become a force to expose what the Zionist Jews did to them and what the Zionist Jews are today doing to the Middle East and to the world at large. Because what they did to the Armenians, especially in 1915, was a part of an ongoing process. It's a process of destruction. And when you listen to the speeches of neoconservative Zionist Jews in America today, they want to continue this process of destruction, of permanent revolution, which they call regime change, and of permanent wars. And we are at a critical moment in human history where this same force that sought to slaughter every Armenian down to the last man, woman, and child is trying to provoke a war with Iran and with Syria, and is trying to provoke the Turks to attack the Kurds in northern Iraq to spark this war. And I think the Armenians have a self-interest, and since Armenians are such a beautiful people, that if they were to become a cohesive force, they could become a political force to expose this and to try to prevent it.
So basically what would you say to the Christians who believe into Zionism and they stand for state of basically chosen people?
I would say that they are adhering to anti-Christian beliefs which were introduced into dispensational Christianity, again by crypto-Jews, by Jews who pretended to be Christians and introduced these beliefs. For example, the belief in the rapture was created by Jesuit crypto-Jews, Ribeiro and Lacunza, and this belief that these American Christians, and I think there are 30 or 40 million of them, believe that they have to start a war against Russia and create a nuclear war so that 2 billion human beings will be killed. And they believe selfishly that when they provoke this war, they themselves will be raptured up into heaven and will not have to suffer for it. And they are so selfish that they're willing to make everyone else suffer for it so that this can happen, and they believe that Jesus will then come. Now, these beliefs are nowhere to be found in the New Testament. They were manufactured by Jews who took over the Jesuit movement, and the Jesuit movement was started by Jews, and they created all these beliefs because they wanted to create a war between Protestant Christians and Catholics. But today they're using that to try to provoke a World War III and to make it a nuclear world war. And these Christian Zionists are actually hated by Jews, as all Christians traditionally have been hated by Jews. And when I say Jews, I'm speaking in very general terms, and I shouldn't. I should be very specific and say that those Zionist Jews who are using these Christians dislike them and consider them foolish and stupid, and they have bribed and blackmailed their leaders in order to lead these Christians again into fighting against Muslims, just as they did by killing the Armenians to instigate the First World War. They are trying to create a war between Christianity and Islam to provoke the Third World War, which they believe will ultimately fulfill all their Jewish prophecies, and so that they can destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock and rebuild the Jewish temple, and then anoint their Jewish king and rule the world from Zion. And as crazy as it sounds, you can actually find Jewish rabbis preaching those exact ideas in Israel.
Which is the Antichrist, basically.
If I were a Christian, I would certainly recognize the fact that it is the Antichrist, and it is certainly anti-Christian.
Right.
And it is exactly what was prophesied to happen in the book of Revelation.
Well, Christopher, we have come to the conclusion of our time. Thank you very much for joining with us, and very soon we will see you in our community. We are going to invite you here so we can have a big conference. Thank you very much again for joining with us today. I will call you tomorrow to thank you personally again.
Thank you very much, sir. I am very grateful for the opportunity to speak to the Armenian community, and I hope that my book is helpful, and I encourage people to read it, and if they have any objections, to email me, and I will consider whatever they have to say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again very much.
Ուրեմն որովհետև մեր ժամը վերջացավ, անոնք որ հերախոսի վրա են գրնան, հերացանի վրա մնան, որով ինձ արդեն սիգնալի մեր ժամը վերջացավ, ահավասիկ լսեցին Քրիստոֆեր Ջոն Բjerknes-ին իր խոսակցությունը հայոց ցեղասպանության վերաբերյալ որ քիրքը գա, անոնք որ հարցում ունին գրնան իրեն email-ն էլ գրնակ, եթե email-ը չստացակ, ադրեսը գրնակ ինձ վերջի հերացանել եւ խոսին ադոր մասին, որովհետև մեր ժամը վերջացավ, միջև քաշապատ ասված է։ Բարի երեկո, սիրելի հայրենակիցներ, ինչպես երկու շաբաթ առաջ ունեցանք հաղորդաշարը բարոն Քրիստոֆեր Ջոն Բjerknes-ի հետ, այսօր պիտի շարունակենք երկրորդ մասը այդ հաղորդումին, ուրեմն նորեն պիտի խոսենք անգլերեն լեզվով այս հաղորդումը։ Անցյալ անգամ բավականին մեծ արձագանք ելավ, այսօր պիտի շարունակենք այդ նյութը հայոց ցեղասպանության վերաբերյալ, ինչպես զիոնիստական շարժումը նախապատրաստել էր մեր ցեղասպանությունը։ Ուրեմն պիտի ժամանակ չանցնեմ, պիտի մեկ անգամ երթանք բարոն Քրիստոֆեր Ջոնսին։ Good afternoon, Mr. Christopher Jones. How are you?
Very good, sir. How are you?
Praise the Lord. We had a topic last time about the Jewish genocide of the Armenian Christians and about the book, actually, that you wrote. And I believe there is a second edition for it.
Yes, I put up an enlarged second edition, which your listeners can find at jewishism.com, JEWISHRACISM.com, and it includes many new interesting facts.
And I would like to, first of all, thank you for last time that you had, and we welcome you the second time to our show, to our Armenian community, actually. I would like to also talk about the topic of the new edition that you made about Atatürk, if you can elaborate on that, please.
Well, there was an article published in the Jewish Daily Forward from New York back in 1994, which revealed that Mustafa Kemal, who was called Ataturk, father of the Turks, identified himself as a descendant of Shabbatai Tzvi, who was a false Jewish messiah in the 1600s, who started this cult of Jews who wanted to create a revolution worldwide, and they based it on the Lurian Kabbalah. And one of Shabbatai Tzvi's successors was Baruch Yah Russo, who started the Dernme cult in Salonika, Greece, which eventually perpetrated the Young Turk revolution and the genocide of the Armenians.
And how has been the response since the last show we made? Can you talk about that a little bit? Are there any interests?
The response has been very positive. I've been contacted by several Armenians. They were all very grateful for my bringing this information out and collecting it all into one source. They're interested. They want to help to disseminate the information, and I'm very grateful to the Armenian community for that.
Do you know if you have been contacted by any Armenian organizations?
Not as far as I know. You are the only and the primary, well, the only Armenian organization that has taken a serious interest in it, and I'm very grateful to you for that, and I look forward to working with you in the future to help educate Armenians as to this aspect of their history.
When you say you were contacted with some Armenians, I guess it was just individuals, I take it?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
You also talked about the individual that was in England, Malcolm, in the book.
Yes, James A. Malcolm, who was allegedly of Persian-Armenian descent, but I suspect he may well have been a crypto-Jew because he was a very ardent Zionist and took a much greater interest in promoting Zionism than he did in promoting Armenian independence.
And could we talk about his role in the propaganding the genocide, the Zionism?
That's another thing that I added to the book to give the reader a greater understanding of what happened and a more definite perspective. James A. Malcolm was the one who introduced the idea to the British government that they could utilize international Zionism to draw America into the First World War on the side of the Allies. This was in a period when the French were deserting, the British were weakening, and the Germans were about to win the war. So the Zionists had a great deal of leverage to get whatever they wanted done. Both the Germans and the British were desperate to gain the support of the Zionist community. And Malcolm came up with the idea that he could go to Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, who was blackmailing President Wilson, because President Wilson had sent love letters to a woman named Mrs. Peck, and they had these love letters. And Brandeis was made a Supreme Court justice by blackmailing Wilson based on these letters. He also got the Federal Reserve Act passed, the Income Tax Act passed, and Malcolm came up with the idea that if the British were to issue the Balfour Declaration, promising the Jews a homeland in Palestine after the war, that the Jews in America would insist that President Wilson bring America into the war on the side of the British and defeat the Germans.
And he was basically, in your belief, he was a crypto-Jew, or are there any facts behind it?
It's a belief at this point. I haven't had the opportunity to trace out his lineage and to look exactly into it. I suspect it strongly, though, because even into the 30s and 40s and 50s even, I think he died in 52, he was a very strong supporter of Zionism. He published several letters to the editor in the London Times, for example, and his obituary in the London Times included a couple paragraphs by a so-called Zionist correspondent, which again reaffirmed the fact that it was Malcolm who engineered the, they call it a quid pro quo, this for that, contract between World Jewry and the British government, that if the British government issued the Balfour Declaration, Zionist Jews would bring America into the war on the side of the British. Now, it's significant because this extended the war for 2 more years and resulted in millions more deaths and a great expense to Americans. It was really a treacherous act that Malcolm performed.
And what role he played in the Armenian organizations?
What role did he play in the Armenian organization?
Yes.
He drafted letters to encourage the Zionists and to provide them with the Armenian support. I forget the name of the exact thing, but these letters were republished in the New York Times and I believe in the London Times at a time when the Balfour Declaration was issued. He came out very strongly in support of it, of course. It had all been his idea from the beginning. And I suspect he may have been a Rothschild agent.
You said Rothschild. Of course, Rothschilds were the financiers of the genocide.
Yes, and the Rothschilds also were long-time Zionists. The whole schemes originated with the Rothschild in the early 1800s, and you'll notice that the Balfour Declaration was made out directly to Lord Rothschild, which establishes a contract between the British people and Lord Rothschild. And the Rothschilds also had their agents write extensively in the 1840s that they sought to become the king of the Jews and to rule from Jerusalem.
Basically, they still believe they're the king of the Jews, which they want to build the Temple of Solomon, which, according to the history, is going to be the Antichrist.
Yes.
Which biblical proofs we can see. What would you?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's directly stated in the Psalms of David, and they believe that they descend from King David and that they are the divine lineage.
It's very interesting to me, Armenia and basically the land of Palestine is way too far from each other. In your opinion, what's the main ideology behind it that they wanted to destroy the Armenians in order to build Jerusalem, state of Israel.
The Armenians served the Turkish Empire very well, and they were the intelligentsia and the ministers and the lawyers and the doctors and the professionals, and they kept the Ottoman Empire thriving. And by wiping out the Armenians, the Jews were able to destroy the Ottoman Empire, which was their goal because the Ottoman Empire controlled Palestine. So in order to destroy the Turkish Empire, it was a good move, though an evil move on their part, to destroy the Armenians. Another thing is that both Armenia and the Jews represent ancient peoples who wanted to reestablish their nations as independent nations after the Turkish Empire was partitioned. Mm-hmm. And in order to partition the Turkish Empire, they first had to destroy it. And one of the ways that they destroyed it was by pitting Christians and Muslims against one another. So by having the crypto-Jews slaughter the Armenians, they were able to blame it on the Muslims and start the Balkan Wars to partition the Turkish Empire in Europe, which eventually led to the First World War, which completely destroyed the empire. And then they were able to partition it up and try to seize control of Palestine. That was the plan. It didn't work out exactly as they expected because many Jews did not want to participate in it. But that was the goal.
So for years they have been able to manipulate the Armenian mind, thinking that the Muslims, Muslims were perpetrators of the Armenian genocide. For years it has been passed. For lately, there are proofs through researchers and through historians that it was Talat and the rest of these non-human individuals, they were crypto-Jews who perpetrated the Armenian genocide. In your own opinion, have you done a research how they have kept this secret?
They've kept it secret because they've maintained a stranglehold on the Turkish government. And they set the Turkish government up to deny that the genocide even occurred, and thereby implicate the Turkish people as the instigators and perpetrators of it. Because people don't realize that the Turkish government is actually run by Derme Jews. And they were also able to do it by limiting the influence of the Turkish government. After they had destroyed the Turkish Empire, they made it a very independent force under Ataturk that got rid of the idea of any imperialism, and therefore they were able to alienate themselves from the Armenian people and put them under the control of the Soviet Jews. And another thing is that they have great influence in the mass media and in the governments of the world, and they have consistently tried to block the spread of information about the Armenian genocide. Just a decade ago, it was almost unheard of. Many, many people weren't even aware of it, let alone aware of the fact that it was actually a Jewish genocide perpetrated against Armenian Christians.
And how I understand they have been able to keep the secret, but have they used the Armenian individuals, organizations in order to keep the secrets?
Well, there's always been a taboo about blaming Jews for anything, because immediately when you do, you're called anti-Semitic. So even the honest Armenian investigators who looked into this genocide are very reluctant to bring up the Zionist issue and the fact that crypto-Jews were behind it for fear of being stigmatized as anti-Semites. I think their primary goal is first to gain acknowledgement that the genocide itself existed, which will inevitably lead researchers to the conclusion that it was perpetrated by crypto-Jews. There are the letters from Gerard Lothar, who was the ambassador from the British government to the Ottoman Empire, where he writes to the British Foreign Office that this was really a Jewish takeover and not a Turkish revolution, and that these crypto-Jews utilized Freemasonry in order to organize the revolution and perpetrated it, and that all the leaders were Jews and Freemasons, and that it was funded through Jewish bankers and Jewish influence, and its goal was a Zionist goal to establish a Jewish state in Palestine and to destroy Muslim unity and the integrity of the Turkish Empire, and they were highly successful in that.
And now, of course, we know Turkey is basically controlled by the same powers, and
especially in the military. Ataturk was succeeded by the Turkish military as the overseer of the Turkish people, and the Turkish people who are secular, those who followed Ataturk, now follow the military, and they look to the military as a watchdog that they believe is absolutely apolitical. And they want it to remain a secular society as Ataturk had proposed. And Turks have great faith that the military will protect them from within and without, and they allow this military to become a sort of military dictatorship. And they believe that this military will protect them, but they don't realize that this military is actually completely in the control of the Derme Jews, which is why Turkey, against its Islamic interests, has always been a strong sponsor of Israel.
And lately we hear the vicious murders of Christians in Turkey as we speak. The Armenian individual that was killed, Hrant Dink, also 3 missionaries, they were butchered. And the blame is going on the Islamist fanatics. Do you have any idea or research on that?
Well, it's a very interesting and sophisticated game that they're playing between the PKK and Turkey, and the Kurds are being trained by the Mossad to perpetrate acts of terrorism against Turks and Armenians and against Iraqis in order to foment a war in the region, which will bring in Iran, Syria, Turkey, and certainly Armenia. And Armenia is also in a unique position because of its strong ties to Russia, both historically and in terms of their need for energy resources. And they don't have good relations with either Turkey or Azerbaijan. They have a little bit better relations with Georgia, which serves as a gateway to Europe. But I think their strongest ties are to Russia. And one of the goals of world Jewry is to again attack Russia and instigate a nuclear war with Russia. And the Armenians are inevitably going to be caught up in that. And the Turks, I think, are being utilized as the key instigators of this, just as they were utilized in the Armenian genocide to attack the Armenians as cohorts of the Turks. And they were promised that after the First World War they would be given a Kurdistan, just as the Armenians were promised by President Wilson, who again was being blackmailed by Justice Brandeis. Wilson promised Armenians that they would be given an independent nation. And Wilson and the Zionists reneged on that promise, and it was given over to the Soviet Union. And the Kurds are again going to get slammed after all this happened, but they don't realize it.
Obviously, we know not everybody is a Zionist, but there is a power which we all have heard of, Freemasonry, which could we a little bit elaborate, what is it controlled by, Freemasonry? Does it have any secret powers that is collaborating with Zionists?
Freemasonry evolved as a secret society in which people could meet and exchange ideas that they couldn't openly exchange in society. And in order to join it, you have to reveal all your personal secrets. And once you reveal your personal secrets, you're not only revealing your personal secrets, but other people's personal secrets, and you're liable to blackmail. So people who get high up in Freemasonry are people who can be controlled, and they promote them into positions of power, especially in politics. Now, there's a specific sect in Freemasonry called the Scottish Rite, and the Jews became involved with Freemasonry in the 1700s through the Frankist movement and through the Derme Turks of Salonika, who wanted to instigate revolution. Mm-hmm. And the Freemason societies, including the Illuminati with Adam Weishaupt, were able to allow the Jews to funnel in funds, to speak in private, and to corrupt politicians in order to subvert these societies. And in Europe, there was a great convulsion of revolutions in 1848, which Disraeli, who was a Zionist Jew, anticipated and wrote about in 1844. So Freemasonry has been an institution both to corrupt people, to manage people, and to spread revolutions. It was involved in the American Revolution. It was involved in the French Revolution. It was involved in the Young Turk Revolution. And it was also involved in the Russian Revolution. Trotsky and Lenin were high-level Freemasons.
And Marx.
And Marx, absolutely. And Adolf Cremieux and several other Jews in the Israelite Alliance Universelle, I forget the exact title.
I believe also Hitler was somehow in a secret society.
Hitler was absolutely an agent of the Zionists. He was funded by the Zionists. He sprouted out of organizations which had been created by the Zionists, such as the Tula Gesellschaft.
Right.
And all of these secret societies are being utilized, especially today in the Middle East. Freemasonry is a very big problem because it allows Zionist Jews to recruit Islamic traitors into their cause. And you'll see that all of the governments of the Middle East have been corrupted by people involved in Freemasonry and other secret societies, such as in Iran, they have the Hojiatiyya, who are supposedly a sect of Shiite Muslims who are trying to provoke a world war so that their Messiah will arrive, but are actually sponsored by communist Jews to subvert Iran against its own interests, to create a conflict whereby the Zionist Jews can wipe out Iran.
Which makes, in political world, it makes big sense that it's in their best interest, basically. I would also like to ask you, in your book you have Noahidic laws at the end. Could you a little bit elaborate on those laws?
I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Noahidic laws. Noahidic laws.
Oh, Noahide laws, yes.
Noahide.
The Jews believe that Noah was given a covenant with God, and that there were 7 laws given in the time of Noah, which therefore apply to all human beings because Noah is the father of the modern human race, and that Gentiles are compelled to obey these 7 laws. And these laws are set forth in the Talmud, in the book of Sanhedrin, folios 56 to 60. And they say that all Gentiles are compelled to recognize that there is God and only one God, and that idol worship is forbidden. Those are the big ones of the Noahide laws.
They consider the Christians as idol worshippers, basically.
Yes, in the Talmud and in the Toledeth Yehuda, it specifically states that Jesus is an idol. Mm-hmm. Therefore, Christians who worship Jesus will be beheaded. And you'll notice that in the revolutions in which Jews take over, they impose these Noahide laws on the Gentiles. For example, in the French Revolution, they chopped off the heads of Christians and tried to make the French people worship their government. And it was a form of enforcing the Noahide laws on the Gentiles. And you'll notice that even today, well, especially today, in our own American Congress, we have rabbis coming before the Congress, especially from a specific group of ultra-Orthodox Jews known as the Chabad Lubavitch movement. Mm-hmm. And they are saying that the laws of Congress are based on the Noahide laws.
Aren't those rabbis also anti-Zionists?
No, the anti-Zionists are Natura Carta. Now,
they're basically certain, 5%, 10%?
I don't think they themselves know how large their movement is, and it swells and shrinks as political things change. They say that it's more a representation of an attitude than an actual organized group. Mm-hmm. Now, the Natura Cartae are based on the Talmudic commandments in the book of Ketubot 111a, which state that the Jews are forbidden to return to Palestine until the Messiah arrives, and can take no political actions to try to bring about the arrival of the Messiah, and they are also commanded to be obedient to the governments under which they live. Now, there was a split that happened in the ultra-Orthodox community when Theodore Herzl came around, and they are all descended from the same ultra-Orthodox community, which are ultimately descended from the Frankish Jews, but there was a split along the idea of Zionism. But after the State of Israel was founded in 1948, or 47, depending on how you want to look at it, the ultra-Orthodox community had this lineage which ultimately resulted in Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who was the head of the Chabad Lubavitch movement. And I think it started out with Tor Balsam, or whatever his name was. And they had the mythology that there would be 7 of these leaders who they look upon as precursors to the Messiah, and that when the 7th one dies, the Jewish Messiah will arrive. And the Chabad Lubavitch, which ultimately started out as anti-Zionist, became strongly Zionist in the 1950s, especially under Mendel Menachem Schneerson, who I think died in the late 1990s, and who is looked upon by many of the Lubavitchers as the Messiah, as the King of the Jews. And they believe that his spirit is alive and will manifest itself soon, especially after the Jews rebuild the temple in Jerusalem.
So how is it that they've been able to be organized so strongly and destroy cultures and nationalities? The first genocide was the Armenian genocide. How is it that they can assimilate in different cultures but yet keep their own? Is it through the Talmud they read? Is it through the Zohar they read? Or what kind of power is it that keeps them united?
There are two primary aspects. One is their racism, which is rooted in Judaism, and the other is their great wealth. And those two things work very well together because they're able to corrupt things through their tribal loyalty to one another. They form a cohesive group, and then they utilize their own members as crypto-Jews to break up the cohesiveness of all other societies. They always try to get brothers fighting against brothers in the other societies where, well, they maintain absolute cohesiveness. And that gives them a tremendous advantage in their political battles. And Judaism also entails a mythology that the Jews have to be spread out to the ends of the earth in order for the Messiah to arrive. So the Jews wanted to travel to every single country, and they are also told in their religious mythology that they have to destroy all the Gentile governments and take control of those governments. So they have a plan that other people don't have that they are carrying out, and they are very faithful to that plan. And they have the means to carry it out, both because they store knowledge as to how to do it. They are taught how to do it in the Talmud, and they have an unethical code of conduct that allows them to do these things as obedience to God, which other human groups would see as evil.
Now, we know that not all Jews follow this methodology or theology they have, the Talmud or Zohar. How many percent follow it?
I suspect that well over 90% are unaware of what it really signifies, and that was also by design. The Jewish leaders wanted to keep the Jewish people ignorant, and ultimately in the 1700s, this Shabbatayan movement wanted to make the Jews secular and to pretend to convert to Christianity and Islam and ultimately to become atheistic, which is also part of the plan. They believe that the Messiah will arrive when the Jewish people themselves have become heretical. So there has been a strong push in Jewry through the communist movement and through other liberal utopian movements, which replace Jewish mythology with a political mythology of Jewish world rule, one world government, Jews controlling all the wealth, Jews being the light unto the nations, which provide all nations with Jewish culture and Jewish moral codes, which they see as being a positive thing. But the reality is that in order to institute Jewish rule, in order to institute Jewish culture, and in order to institute Jewish religion and moral codes, they have to destroy the governments, the cultures, and the religions of every other human being. And they always look upon it as their duty many of them without realizing even that what they're doing is very highly destructive, and if it were done to them, they would resent it very strongly and call it anti-Semitism. There's a strong double standard built into Judaist mythologies, which blinds them to the fact that what they're doing is destructive and murderous. And we can see it in the way that they treat the Nazi genocide of the European Jewry in a very different light from the way they treat the Jewish communist genocide of the Slavic people and of the Chinese people and of the Cambodians, for example.
And
there's a strong double standard in Jewish culture, and it's not always done with malicious intent. It's done through an arrogance that they're not even aware of.
But their leaders are aware of it, obviously.
Their leaders are aware of it, they delight in it, and they view it as a religious obligation.
They have a plan.
They're racist. They are racist. They think that they are a superior race, that other human beings are subhuman, and that God, the Jewish people have a divine DNA, which is godly. and that non-Jewish people have a DNA which was injected into the human race when they say Eve fornicated with the serpent and created Cain. They believe that non-Jews are descended from Cain and they are descended from Adam, and that they're a holy divine race, and they have to destroy non-Jews in order for God to come back and create divine order on the earth.
But those beliefs, they don't even exist in the Torah. They came from Talmud, which is not even the word of God. It's a Babylonian religion. They took it in.
Well, even within the Torah and within the Hebrew Bible and in the Psalms of David, they establish what evolved into their messianic myths. And yes, I agree with you that this was an evolution that took place after the initial books were written. Mm-hmm. But even within those, you see the seeds, and there are strongly racist statements in the Torah itself where the Jews are a divine chosen people to be above all other nations, to rule all other nations, and to destroy all other nations. That is strongly within the Torah itself.
But in a logical world, or in a logical mind, let's put it, God that is presented in the New Testament, who is love, I would not think for a second the God of love would ever commend these evil thoughts.
Well, we have to look at the New Testament as what it is. New Testament literally means new covenant. Mm-hmm. Now, there were several covenants. As I said, there was the covenant with Noah, and then we had the covenant with Abraham, where Abraham represents a selected race to inherit the land of Palestine and to be the chosen people. If the Jews obeyed, it was a conditional covenant. The Jews violated the conditions of that covenant, and they also rejected their Messiah. Now, I'm speaking in Christian beliefs, not in my own beliefs. They also rejected the Messiah, Jesus, who arrived as the King of the Jews. Now, when they did that, they broke the covenant, and there was a new covenant, which is called the New Testament, that was established through Jesus and through his sacrifice, which gave redemption not only to the Jewish people, but to all of mankind. And that was the ultimate sacrifice of redemption, which ends all other sacrifices. And it is only by way of Jesus that people obtain redemption and salvation. And that is the Christian ideology, which is very different from the Judaic ideology. Now, modern Jews have tried to blend the two into something they call Judeo-Christianity, which is a mythology. Now, it is true that Christianity evolved out of Judaism. It is also true that Christianity represents a new covenant. Now, this new world that will be created is a heavenly kingdom in Christianity. For the Jews, it is a worldly kingdom. For the Christians, all of these things must be done by God himself, who can be the ultimate arbiter of who is good and who is evil. Now, there was a break in Jewish tradition where they decided that God was not acting to restore the Jewish people to Palestine, so they would have to act on their own behalf and become their own Messiah. And this was clearly stated by Moses Hess in his book, Rome and Jerusalem. So the Jewish people decided that they, as a cohesive force, could act to bring these things about. And they've done it through communism and through other things and through Zionism to try to make it happen, which is very, very different from the Christian faith. But they have also subverted many Christian faiths, and you see today in America the Christian Zionist movement.
That's true.
Where these people are also trying to bring about highly destructive wars that will ruin the human race. And they have been taught by the Jews that they will be so-called raptured up into heaven while all this happens. And that by committing nuclear war against, say, the Russian people, they will actually be doing a good deed because they will hasten the end times and cause Jesus to return to the earth, and that after the tribulation, they themselves will be restored to this heavenly kingdom. But this has all been a process of Judaization, of the ruin of Christianity.
You're right on the track, but also we have to think about the Christian Zionism is destructive to the church. It's destroying the real Christian philosophy and theology, because God never told to kill the Muslims or to kill the Chinese or to kill the Armenians. In your research, who are today's Amalekites, which is a secret to the world, but to Jews and Zionists, they know who are the Amalekites.
Well, the Jews had, for thousands of years the mythology that the Armenians were the Amalekites, and that was one of the reasons that they committed genocide specifically against the Armenians.
The first, I believe it was 953, the documented words through some rabbi. It was 953, I believe.
953, then you're aware of something that I'm not aware of, and I would be interested for the exact source of that. That's very interesting. I knew it was in the Byzantine Empire, and that goes way back before 953, but it's interesting that you have a source for that.
I've recently read about it after reading your article. It was in 953, there was a comment made that Armenians were Amalekites. I read it through internet research.
That's very interesting. Now, the Amalekites serve as a convenient racist basis for the Jews to stigmatize people that they want to destroy. For example, when they wanted to destroy the German people, they referred to them as the Amalekites. Today, they refer to the Palestinians as the Amalekites.
Yes.
And it creates an us versus them mentality and dehumanizes other human groups. And it provides them with a religious basis and with a call to arms for the whole tribe to unite against this force. And it's such a powerful force because the mythology is that the Amalekites want to exterminate the Jews, when the reality is that the Jews want to exterminate their enemies. So by identifying the people that they want to destroy as the Amalekites, they scapegoat those people for their hatred of them, and they give themselves a religious justification for the mass murder of those people. And they committed mass murder against the Germans during the war and after the war. They committed mass murder against the Russians, and they committed mass murder against the Armenians. Now, these are all people whom they've identified as being the Amalekites.
I believe just like they used the Armenian leaders to manipulate them to different kinds of freedoms, they're using the Christian leaders today, manipulating them, and we're expecting a genocide of the Christians very soon again in the United States probably.
Absolutely. It's an exact analogy where you had the Armenians being led to believe that they should conduct a revolution in the Ottoman Empire that would result in an independent Armenia and an independent Judea. They brought the Armenians into conflict with the Turkish Empire and used them to create a casus belli, a grounds of war between European Christians and the Turks. And today they are manipulating American Christians to believe that Muslims are their enemy. The same thing is happening again. And they're trying to get American Christians to serve as their army to destroy Muslims, which will also weaken America. You can see that the American economy is being severely weakened by all this debt which is accruing through these wars, and also our moral fiber is being corrupted because we're being made hateful. We're being made into racists who want to kill people who have done no harm to us. This, again, is exactly what they did to the Germans when they put the Nazis in power. They taught German school children to hate the Jews, which ultimately they knew would result in the destruction of Germany. And they are doing the same thing to America. America is today the most powerful military force on earth. And since the Jews view themselves as being God's divine presence and the divine rulers of the earth, they want to utilize that force to destroy itself and ultimately leave the world in such a weakened state that this small minority population of Jews will be able to manage it and run it as they managed the vast Soviet empire when they destroyed it and put Jews into positions of power, or put people into power who had Jews at their elbow, the way they had Stalin with Lazar Kaganovich. They're undergoing the same process. They first pump up the economy of a nation so that it builds up its military to a highly developed point. And then when that military is developed to that point, they use that military to weaken the society itself and to bring it into conflict with other societies. And they try to build up these armies and make them very strong so that when they do come into conflict, it is highly destructive. And that destruction allows them to institute revolutions. And when they institute revolutions, they establish chaos. And they then propose the idea that the only means of resolving this chaos is to have an iron-fisted dictator come in and seize power over the nation. and that will then restore order, and once order is restored, the society can evolve into democracy and eventually into communism. But it never happens that way. As soon as they get their puppet dictator into power, they destroy the intellectual structure of the nation, they destroy its culture, and they try to undermine all the heritage that that people has. In order for the Jews to rule the world, they have to ensure that there are no competitive forces who also have a strong heritage and a sense of their own sovereignty and a sense of their own independence. So it is critical for them to get people pitted against one another so that they destroy themselves and destroy their own governments. We can see that America is being set up in this way because the American people are coming to hate their own government. They're coming to hate George Bush. And with their control over the media, they are able to mask the fact that George Bush is doing all of these things at the behest of world Jewry and at the behest of the nation of Israel.
When we go back to the Armenian genocide, the first genocide of the century, until today, in the world governments, most world governments, I could say, they don't recognize the genocide. But in the Second World War, they claimed the Holocaust. And if anybody denies in some countries about the Holocaust, they go to prison, and basically they are looked at the enemy of the state. What are the powers behind denying the Armenian genocide? I would like to have it in detail, the names of the organizations who are against recognition of the Armenian genocide. One of them I would like to ask is Freemasonry.
Freemasonry, I cannot cite a specific example where Freemasonry, in the name of Freemasonry, has denied the Armenian genocide. I have seen Freemasons as individuals come forward and try to say that what happened was not a genocide, that the Turks were defending themselves from Armenian revolutionaries, and that the figures of the dead are supposedly grossly exaggerated. If you have information which specifically ties Freemasonry as an institution to such denials, I would be very interested to see that. I have seen the Israeli government itself and high officials in the Israeli government go around the world and use their influence to keep other governments from recognizing the genocide. And the excuse they use, again, they scapegoat the Turks. For example, the Israelis will come to the U.S. Congress and say, well, you can't recognize the Armenian genocide because we need the Turks at this moment, and this will alienate us from the Turks and will create political conflict between America and Turkey. So they're scapegoating the Turks for what it is that the Israelis want to do. And the Israelis have many motivations for doing it. They want to maintain the idea that the Holocaust of European Jewry was a unique event in history. But as we are revealing, they ultimately want to keep it hidden, the fact that it was Jews who perpetrated this genocide and that it predated the European genocide of the Jews, and it was done as a Holocaust, as a human sacrifice. It was called a Holocaust in the literature of the day, and it represents another genocide. It's even, in some senses, it's a worse genocide in the way that it was conducted and in the percentage of the population that was wiped out.
And but in the
even that had precursors in Cecil Rhodes and the involvement of the Rothschilds in South Africa and in the Boer Wars, where they first established concentration camps.
In the same context, we see the church in the United States is being controlled by the Zionists, and the churchgoers, they're brainwashed into believing that Jews are the chosen people, which, again, we talk about superior people, superhuman beings. Let's put it that way.
Superhuman beings who can commit evil acts, and the Christian Zionists believe that they have to support them anyway. They have to turn a blind eye to all the evil that Israel does. And this is completely against the original doctrines of Christianity.
Absolutely.
Christianity is meant to be a universalist religion. It represents a new covenant. The old covenant was destroyed because the Jews were disobedient to God. And in this new covenant, Jesus says that the peacemakers are blessed, and that we should love one another and help one another. And Israel is built on perpetual war. They want to have war after war so that they can acquire more and more of the Arabs' land. They believe that they have a divine right to take the land from the Nile to the Euphrates, and they are utilizing the American Christians as a hammer to conduct this. And this plan was set forth long ago by Judge Noah, and I quote his writings in my book, The Jewish Genocide of Armenian Christians. And he established the idea of utilizing the American Christians as a military power to wipe out the Turks and to wipe out Islam. But even before then, Jews were creating the precursors of Christian Zionism in the Protestant movement by trying to pit the Turks against the Russians and the Turks against the Protestants and the Protestants against the Catholics and Western Europe against Eastern Europe. They're always trying to generate wars and hatreds and racism. It has been a consistent pattern for hundreds of years, for thousands of years. And it's the only way that they can accomplish what they want to accomplish, because they themselves only represent 12 to 15 million people, at the high end 20 million people, and they simply don't have the means to do it. But instead of abandoning this racism, they utilize corrupted means to fulfill their messianic prophecies. And one of those corrupt means has been the corruption of the Christian Zionist movement. And I think Tex Mars did a wonderful interview with Robbie Noel, where he pointed out that he was being solicited to join the Christian Zionist movement, and it was made very clear to him that there was a lot of money in doing so, and that his book would be heavily promoted, his pulpit would be heavily promoted if he were to sponsor Christian Zionism, which is actually a contradiction in terms, and he would have no part in it, and instead has come out strongly against it. And you can see Jerry Falwell, I think he got a jet from the Israeli government, and today the big man is
John Hagee.
Yes, and you see him when he poses, he usually has Israeli flags blended with American flags, as if this were good for America to have a obedience to a little problematic nation in the Middle East, which we have no ties to.
Well,
that nation is the enemy of the United States. Israel is the worst enemy that the United States has ever had. It is perpetually bringing us into war. It's perpetually bringing us into debt. It is corrupting our minds with racist and hateful ideologies. You see many Zionist Jews taking every opportunity to bring up the Holocaust and to try to tie it to Islam and to say that we have to destroy Islam just as we should have destroyed Hitler before he gained full power. It's terrible. They're perpetually ginning up wars and perpetually creating problems for America. And they have subverted these Christian churches to sponsor it. And they're very powerful. They represent 30 to 40 million American Christians.
Which is
and their ultimate goal is horrific. Their goal is to create a nuclear world war.
To destroy the Amalekites or the Christian
Destroy
nations.
the human race. They have created the mythology that there must be an apocalyptic war which will wipe out 2/3 of Jews and I think 1/3 of the human race, and that at the end of this tribulation, Jesus will return, and these people, many of them, a very large percentage of them, believe that this will happen in their lifetime. Now, this represents a political swing vote in our national elections, and Karl Rove and the neoconservatives created this swing vote to sponsor the Zionist movement. It was all done deliberately. It has nothing to do with true theology, and it is the absolute corruption of Christianity to turn it from a religion, a universalist religion of love, into a slave religion that worships Jews as if they are God and sponsors the inhuman acts that the Jews of Israel are committing against their neighbors and against the human race.
Christopher, I would like to ask you a question, very important question, because for years and years the Armenian people have been going back and forth every April 24 demonstrating one day a year, where versus we see Judaizers, they're pretty much determined to do their job every which way they have to in order to succeed their politics. But we see Armenians, our people, once a year demonstrating in front of the Turkish consulate raising their voices to recognize the Armenian genocide, and we have no answers for the past 100 years, almost 100 years. What would you say to the Armenian people in order to wake up and see the real picture behind it?
I think that as soon as the Armenian people point the finger at the true culprits, there will be a lot of attention focused on it. And they will be forced to try to misinform the public as to what happened. And I think that also if you can inform the Turkish people that they are not responsible, the Zionist Jews will no longer be able to pit the Turks against the Christians and the Christians against the Muslims. So that if you tell the truth and cut through the misinformation and really identify the true culprit, you can greatly improve the situation in the Middle East and start to create a rapprochement between the Armenians and the Turks, and you can start to unseat the power of the Derneğ in Turkey itself. And I think that's fundamental to gaining a healing process between the Armenians and the Turks as to what happened, and to gain universal recognition of what happened. And I hope that you and I can work together and perhaps even create an institute dedicated to researching the Jewish involvement in the Armenian genocide, and we can establish a website. Perhaps we can produce a video documentary to spark interest in this. What really brought the Jewish Holocaust to the fore, to the world public, was in the 1970s. There was a television series about the Holocaust. And that is the event that really put it into the consciousness of the American people. And the Jews have also pulled lots of funding to get Holocaust museums built, but they produce, very often they produce television documentaries, they produce films which relate to the Holocaust, and the Armenians, in order to gain that kind of a public awareness, have to do the same thing.
Absolutely. At least they were working on it. They were determined to come to a solution. But like I said, the Armenian people are determined to go to demonstration once a year, and after the demonstration, go about their work. So I believe they should be more organized, and I'm pretty much in agreement with you to create the institute to do this research. And I know many Armenians will be actively joining in this institute to do the research, basically.
And you also have to learn to stigmatize people who want to deny it and people who want to create infighting among Armenians. You're going to find that world Jewry is very clever at pitting Armenians against themselves and creating dissensions and infighting that prevents you from becoming a cohesive force and prevents you from organizing such that you can put forward a single solid message. Now, the Jews have a single solid message about the Holocaust. It was a unique event in history. It was done to exterminate the Jewish race as a whole, and it was the result of German racism. Now, none of those things are actually true, but the Armenians have to form a cohesive, single message that can be expressed directly and clearly, and they have to not allow their ranks to be infiltrated by people who want to create infighting. They shouldn't argue amongst themselves. They shouldn't become paranoid that they have been infiltrated. They should instead focus on their goals and focus on creating an exact historical understanding of what happened that they can pinpoint and that they can identify with solid facts. And that has not yet happened, but I think it's a process that we can begin. And once that coheres, once it forms a solid force, you will then have the political foundation to insist that other people acknowledge this, or to then be able to accuse them of having some ulterior motive as to why they are denying it.
Like most of Americans, they were not aware of what's going on until some of these videos aired, or Tex Marx came to Los Angeles and had a very interesting topic also. People have to wake up.
Present it, you have to sell it to the public in a way that's palatable to the public, just as the Jews have done with the Holocaust through their control of Hollywood. You have to somehow create networks where this information can be brought out, and it can be brought out in a way that's believable, understandable, and that sparks interest. And once that happens, it will catch on like wildfire.
Christopher, I would like you to repeat your website one more time for the audience.
If you go to JewishRacism.com, JewishRacism.com, you will find at the head of the page a link that goes to the enlarged second edition of my book, The Jewish Genocide of Armenian Christians. And if you begin to read that book, you will discover that the British government and the press from England that was involved in Constantinople and was highly involved in what was happening because the British had a strong interest in that region, because the British wanted access to India and China, and they had to go through the Middle East to get there. And they also had interest in Egyptian cotton and in agricultural products from the region. And they focused in on what caused the Young Turk Revolution, who was behind it, who was behind the massacres of Christians in the Ottoman Empire. And they again and again came to the conclusion that these were crypto-Jewish Freemasons from Salonika.
Well,
There's no denying it's a very well-established fact, and no one has refuted it. All they try to do is claim that it's Jew baiting to bring these facts out. But the facts are indisputable, and I think they're gaining momentum. And the more that detractors try to minimize the significance of these facts, the more they will expose themselves as liars. So what's really needed is a professionally done video documentary where people can get the information they need in the period of an hour to 2 hours that will spark interest in this, and that will expose the fact that those who try to trivialize these facts or deny these facts are liars and are trying to misinform the public.
Well, thank you very much. I will, for joining our show second time, because we have came to the conclusion of our time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much for having me and for giving me a forum in which to express my ideas.
Thank you. I will put you on hold. I will close the show and I will answer your phone call one more time. Please stay on hold. Ինչպես որ լսեցինք, այս հաղորդումը երկրորդ մասն էր, եւ որովհետեւ ցեզի խոստացանք պիտի հրավիրենք բարոն Քրիստոֆեր Ջոն Բjerknesը, այս եկող ամիս հուլիսին պիտի հրավիրվի Los Angeles եւ բոլորդ կնակ ներկայանալ դեսնադրեն, պիտի հայտարարենք երբ պիտի հոսը լայնքը։ Ուրեմն շնորհակալություն, որ մեզ հետ միացաք միջև քաշապատ ասված ցեզեն։ Երեգոգի միանանք ուղի եթերով, հավասիկ մենք կանգնած ենք չորեքշաբթի օրը, որ պիտի ունենանք այդ ժողովը շատ կարևոր բարոն Քրիստոֆեր Ջոն Bjerknesի հետ։ Եվ այսօր, որովհետև ինքը մեզ հետ ներկա է ժամանած է Շիկագոյեն վաղվա համարաթավակի համար, իրեն հրավիրեցինք այս շոուի մեջ, որ խոսի մի քանի հարցեր առաջ, որ ունենանք այդ lecture-ը վաղը։ Thank you very much, Mr. Christopher Jon Bjerknes, for appearing on our show.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
We are going to have the big day tomorrow.
Yes.
That's what we have prepared for finally, and we're looking tomorrow for that day. I would like to ask you on a few notes, what kind of a spirit you're looking in the Armenians for tomorrow?
Open-mindedness and a determination to come to grips with the history of what happened to the Armenians during the Armenian genocide.
And I know you have prepared approximately how many hours of lecture?
Well, I think the lecture will take about an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes. I prepared 3 PowerPoint presentations which I'll be showing, and before each presentation I'll discuss what's going to be shown, then we'll show the presentation, and then following the presentation I'll summarize what was said in the presentation itself.
And I want you to prepare, first of all, to the audience for tomorrow. We don't want anybody to think it is anti-Semite or quote-unquote, haters of this or that. Would you explain about your background first?
My grandfather was Jewish on my mother's side, And this really has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It's a historical study of what happened in the Armenian genocide, and it simply addresses facts.
And once we clear that up, you have your facts on a historic basis. Could you elaborate, how did you come on those facts, first of all?
Well, the principal evidence that we have are reports from the London Times. The Vienna correspondent of the London Times initiated a series of correspondence that took place in 1911, where he tried to wake up the Jews of England to the fact that Jews in the Ottoman Empire were slaughtering Christians. And he was afraid that there would be a backlash against all Jews if Jews in the Western world were not to condemn these atrocities. And we also have evidence, very important evidence, from the British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, Gerard Lothar. And he wrote several reports to the British Foreign Office where he pointed out the fact that the Young Turk revolution was not so much a Turkish revolution as a Jewish takeover from a certain group of Jews who were centered in Salonika, Greece.
And based on those facts, you said you have some facts from London Times. Could you elaborate on Savitch and Zevi a little bit? What were their plans and Ataturk in connection of?
Shabbatai Zevi was a false Jewish Messiah who in 1666 declared that he was the Messiah of the Jews. And he garnered a large following among the Jews, and he wanted to restore the Jews to Palestine from all over Europe. The Sultan of Turkey captured Shabbatai Zevi and demanded that he either convert to Islam or be killed. So he converted to Islam, but it wasn't a genuine conversion. It was a conversion under coercion. And many of his followers also pretended to convert to the Muslim faith. And Shabbatai Zevi was worshipped as if he were God and as if he were Jesus Christ. His soul is believed by the followers of Shabbatai Zevi to have passed on to another man named Baruchia Russo. Baruchia Russo became the next Jewish Messiah, and he established a cult in Salonika of Jews who would pretend to be Muslims, but they only pretended to be Muslims so that they could gain positions of power in the Ottoman Empire and so that they could destroy the Muslim faith and ultimately replace it with Judaism. And they always practiced Judaism in secret. This group that formed in Salonika, this cult of secret Jews, they're called crypto Jews or Dernmei, established a plan on how to overthrow the Turkish Empire and destroy it. And they wanted to destroy the Turkish Empire because the Turkish Empire controlled Palestine. And the only way that they could gain Palestine as a Jewish colony was to destroy the Turkish Empire. And ultimately their plans manifested themselves in the Young Turk Revolution. And that's why the ambassador for the British Empire to the Ottoman Empire declared that this was not a Turkish revolution, it was in fact a Jewish takeover, because that's exactly what it was.
And what was the connection of, I believe you have some documentation of connection of Ataturk in relations with them?
Yes, there was an article in the Jewish Forward newspaper where a correspondent reported that Ataturk had himself said that he was a direct descendant of Shabbatai Zevi, which is very significant because this Shabbatai Zevi was believed to be the Messiah of the Jews, the King of the Jews, the equivalent of Jesus Christ in more modern times. So it's as if he said he were a descendant of Jesus Christ. And Ataturk was put into power, obviously, because he had this type of a lineage. And we know from several sources that he was among the Dernmei Turks, among this cult of secret Jews who were determined to destroy the Turkish Empire. And he was very clever. He destroyed the Turkish Empire by making the Turks have nationalistic pride. So Turkey as a nation shrunk down from Turkey as an empire. So he tricked the Turks into destroying their own empire by encouraging them to be nationalistic.
And I'm sure you've researched some political views of today's term, what's going on with Kurdistan?
Yes. The Mossad, we know from the BBC that the Mossad is training the Kurds in the PKK on how to attack the Turkish government and also on how to provoke conflicts within Iraq. Iraq is divided between three primary groups: the Kurds, the Sunni Muslims, and the Shia Muslims. The Sunni Muslims have no access to oil, but the Kurds and the Shia have access to oil. The Kurds, like the Armenians, have always wanted to reconstitute an ancient Kurdish nation. And these groups are playing upon that desire to create a nation to get these people to instigate a war in Iraq and a war with Turkey. The Kurds are again being used to instigate a war in the region.
Just like they were used to massacre the Armenians.
Precisely. They were also promised that if they massacred the Armenians,
they will have a greater Kurdistan.
That the First World War would be fought because Christians would be outraged that Muslims had attacked and killed Christians in the Ottoman Empire. That would bring the wrath of Western Christians, European Christians and Americans against the Turkish Empire, and they would destroy it. Once it was destroyed, it could be partitioned into smaller nations, and those nations would include a Jewish Palestine, an Armenia, and a Kurdistan.
What kind of relation does Freemasonry play in all these historical facts?
Both the London Times correspondent and Sir Gerard Lothar, who was ambassador from Britain to the Turkish Empire, stated that Emmanuel Carasso had started a Masonic lodge in Salonika called the Macedonia Resorta Masonic Lodge, and he was the Grand Master of that lodge. And in that lodge, the Committee of Union and Progress created their plans for overthrowing the Sultan. And this was really the secret government behind the government of the Young Turks. It was the Committee of Union and Progress that overthrew the Sultan, that told him that he was overthrown, that captured him and imprisoned him in the houses of Jewish bankers in Salonika. And it was the Committee of Union and Progress that issued the orders for the Armenians to be exterminated. Talat Pasha was another Freemason involved with the Committee of Union and Progress, as was Javid Bai and many others. Almost everyone in the upper ranks of the Young Turkish government were both Freemasons and either open Jews or secret Jews.
Could you name some secret Jews that we might be aware of?
Well, Ataturk, of course, is the most famous. Another one was Talat Pasha, and Talat Pasha was the Minister of the Interior of the Young Turk government. He was also involved with the Committee of Union and Progress, and he was also a Grand Master Freemason. He was Grand Master of the Grand Orient Lodge in Constantinople. Javid Bai was a direct descendant of the family of Baruchia Russo, who was also a false Jewish Messiah like Shabbatai Tzevi, and he was the Minister of Finance. And he made contacts through Paris to the main Jewish banking houses to help finance the Young Turk armies and to run Turkey into debt.
And those individuals proclaimed to be Turkish nationalists, basically.
Absolutely. And they tried to promote Turkish pride so that the Turks would insist that the nations in the Balkans and that all of the empire would become both Turkish and Islamic, which created tensions between Christians and Muslims. The whole plan was for secret Jews to pit Turkish and Muslims against each other so they would fight and the empire would collapse. Then when the empire had collapsed, there would be a peace conference among all these peoples, and the Jews would send a delegation to sit at the table and they would make a petition for a Jewish state in Palestine.
And in relation to all this, today's Turkey, which has been denying the genocide, does it have anything to do with historic facts that you talked about?
Yes. I believe that the Turkish military is controlled by Derme Jews, and there are a lot of other people who believe that as well, and it's basically a well-known fact. This military in Turkey has pledged itself to take the place of Ataturk. And one of the things that Ataturk insisted upon was that Turkey become a modern nation, that Turkey become a European nation, and that Turkey become a secular nation. And if anyone were to rebel against those three ideas, if they were to become strongly Muslim, strongly Turkish as opposed to European, that Ataturk would crush them politically. The military has taken the place of Ataturk, and they are the true ruling government of Turkey and have been for a very long time. Whenever rulers get out of line and don't follow the Zionism of the Turkish army, they are deposed. It's really a military dictatorship. I've heard it described tonight as a junta.
And I believe that's the same group that assassinated Hrant Dink.
I have heard that, yes, that they organized the assassination through a young man and perpetrated it. And the reason that they did it was because they feared that the Armenians were gaining strength and that there was a growing awareness of the Armenian identity of many regions of Turkey.
So it was done by the same powers, dark powers behind it.
It has been the genocide is not over. It is still a battle which is being fought. It's very much alive, and it is potentially at its most dangerous point because it threatens to spark World War III in the region. The Turks are being set up by Zionists, by Israelis, by Mossad, by the Turkish military to instigate World War III. And if that doesn't work, they're going to try it through the Iranians, they're going to try it through the Kurds, they're going to try it through the Syrians. What they're doing is creating instability. The neoconservative Zionists have always said that their goal was not stability in the Middle East, but rather instability, because they believe that through chaos, through nihilism, through the destruction of the entire region, that they will prepare the ground for a new system where they will have absolute hegemony in the region, where Israel will be the strongest, most powerful military force. And they believe that Israel has a religious, political, and moral duty to be the light unto the nations and the most powerful nation in the region and ultimately in the world. So they are creating a dynamic which will result in that by making the other people weaker, since it's very difficult for them to make themselves stronger, though they are the only major nuclear power in the region.
And in spite of all these facts, how have they been successful hiding it from people? Could you explain some of the methods that I'm sure some people now hear it and they disbelieve it or they disagree with it? How have they been able to successfully enable themselves to convince people that what we think is wrong?
Well, they're masters at secrecy. As I said, this cult would pretend to be Muslims. So they put on the face as if they're Turks, but they're not Turks. They're actually Jews descended from this group, and their loyalty is to Israel and to other Jews and not to the Turkish nationals. So the whole system is based upon secrecy. They have many allies in the media and they have many allies in government, and it is a confusing situation which they can deliberately confuse by stating that Turkey is a very important ally of the United States and Israel, and that in order to maintain stability in the region, they have to suppress the truth and suppress the historical facts which make people aware that this terrible crime happened. But in reality, they're committing another crime. The genocide was one crime, covering up the genocide is another crime. And the facts will come out, and the facts are coming out.
You've studied some Armenian history, I believe.
Yes.
Could you explain a little bit about the real Armenian spirit that you've studied?
It's an ancient spirit. It's a spirit that's very tied to Christianity. It's a spirit of nationalism, and it is a spirit of perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds against them. They lived under the Turks for a very long time. Their humanity was attacked. They were not allowed to be full citizens. They lived in a millet system where they were a nation within a nation and they didn't have equal rights with others. And this is also a part of the problem why the truth hasn't come out about all these facts. Because the Armenians have been oppressed for so long, they have developed a culture which inhibits them from coming out strongly to insist that the truth be told. Now, this is not all Armenians, but this has I'm afraid, become a part of the culture of some Armenians, that they want to just get along instead of creating an opposition and insisting upon their rights. They were forced to live in a system where they couldn't insist upon their rights for many hundreds of years.
So basically, it's a giving up, a spirit of giving up, we could say.
I wouldn't say that. It's a multifaceted spirit. And in the political aspect, since they have been oppressed for so long, they are not a strong, cohesive political force for demanding their rights. On the other hand, they have not given up their Armenian identity. They've kept their religious beliefs, they've kept their nationalistic beliefs. And there has to be a transition where the one overwhelms the other. The nationalism has to overwhelm the oppressed spirit, and it's happening.
It is going to happen very soon, hopefully. Where do you see the recognition of Armenian genocide these days? There are some groups who are against it.
Yes.
Could you name some groups and why? Both questions.
The nation of Israel is against it, and there are neoconservative Zionist Jews who are against it. And
do they publicly announce it?
Yes, they do. And the reasons that they give are, as I said, that Turkey is a very important ally, that we are at a critical point in history, and we don't want to rock the boat, and we don't want to upset Turkey. But it's a ridiculous argument, because Turkey is no strong ally to us if Turkey is suppressing the truth. Turkey is an enemy of ours if Turkey is acting in a way that they're going to threaten us by reacting against us if we tell the truth. So that's a silly argument. Also, France and the EU have told the truth and nothing happened to them. Turkey is much more dependent on the United States than the United States is dependent on Turkey. And Turkey should not be alienated by all this, because ultimately the Turks weren't responsible.
So, talking about the groups, why are they giving those excuses? And such as Bob Livingston announced it a few weeks ago.
I believe that it is coming out that Turkey is controlled by its military, and its military consists at the top levels of Derme Jews who are loyal to Israel and not loyal to Turkey, and not loyal to the Islamic faith. And they have substituted the Islamic faith with secularism. I also think that there are Zionist forces who want these facts to be exposed, but they want to blame the Turks and they want to blame the Muslim faith, so that just as the Armenian genocide was meant to pit Christians and Muslims against each other, exposing the Armenian genocide pits Muslims and Christians against one another. They are trying to miscast Turkish people as if they're genetically aggressive and genetically murderous, and they're trying to misrepresent Islam as if it is a religious belief that promotes genocide. So you have the same group with two elements that have different motives. One wants to bring it out so that it creates hostility between Christians and Muslims. The other wants to suppress it so that the fact that it was Jews and crypto-Jews who were behind it never gets out to the main public.
And hiding these truths, would it endanger their Holocaust?
Yes, it will shift.
The world attention, let's put, right?
Not only that, but the image of the Jew as a victim who has never perpetrated a crime such as this against humanity, as the victim of the crime against humanity that the Nazis perpetrated. It will change the image of Zionism, which is used as the justification for committing genocide against the Palestinians. There was kind of many Zionists, including Albert Einstein, openly stated that the Holocaust gives us a reason to steal Palestine from the Palestinians, that we can never allow this to happen again, and that the Jewish people need Israel as national security, even though the Arabs didn't commit the Nazi Holocaust. The Europeans did, but it's the Arabs who have to pay the price for it. But this is going to delegitimize that argument that the Jews are always the victims because it points out that the Jews have often been the aggressors.
And once the truth comes out, which is coming out, and tomorrow you will lecture about it, is it just going to be only one lecture? Are we going to stop fighting for this cause, or are you willing to help the Armenian community with your knowledge and with your historic background and with your research?
Oh, it's only the beginning. I've only scratched the surface. I haven't been researching this all that long. And it's amazing what I've been able to turn up in the period of a year. There has got to be much more information in the archives, in the Turkish archives, in the Armenian archives, in the archives of the British government, in the archives of the secret services of many governments from the period.
How about the archives of Freemasonry?
Absolutely. Many people who have talked about this have talked about the fact that some of these leaders are listed in the registry of B'nai B'rith and in the registry of Freemasonry. And that's how we know that they were both Jewish and Freemasons.
Which, if you think about it, it is related to each other.
It is certainly related to each other in the context of the Armenian genocide. It is also indicative of the nature of secrecy in both organizations. Crypto-Jews live a life of duplicity and secrecy, and Freemasons live a life of duplicity and secrecy. So the two go very well together.
And what can the community leaders do to talk openly without fearing from Zionism? Because I see, or what I've seen so far, there are some people that are aware about it, but they are scared to talk about it.
I think what will happen is that as more Armenians become aware of the facts, a certain righteous rage will develop, and they'll overcome that fear. And as more and more courageous Armenians come out to demand that the truth be told, they will gather together more and more support, and more people will join them, and that this will gain momentum, and there'll be no suppressing it because it's simply the truth. There's no reason that the truth should be suppressed. It's not saying anything against Jewish people to tell the truth of history.
As a matter of fact, we can say most Jews don't even know what we're talking about, or they don't know what happened.
I would go further than that, and I would say that most Jews, when they learn what happened, will be outraged by it, and they will want it to be exposed. I think it is a false fear to fear being labeled as if you're anti-Semitic for telling the truth. And that as more and more people will tell the truth, that weapon which is used against people who tell the truth, the edge will be dulled off of it, and it will become ineffective, and eventually it will backfire on those who try to use it.
What about, we talked about Zionism, we talked about Salonika Jews. What about Rothschilds? What role have they played in the Armenian genocide?
Well, the Rothschilds were the motive force behind Zionism even before the word Zionism was coined. In the 1820s, the Rothschilds had made enormous fortunes off of central banking and off of financing wars. And they also got very good at fomenting revolutions and at provoking wars to run nations into debt, because when nations ran into debt, they collected the interest on that debt. And they were also able to manipulate nations politically to accomplish their goals. In the 1820s, the Rothschilds declared that they wanted to restore the Jews to Palestine, and they wanted to make one of the Rothschild family the king of the Jews. And in the religious context of Judaism, the king of the Jews is the Messiah, is the Jesus Christ of the Jews. So the Rothschilds were doing what the Hebrew Bible tells Jews to do. The Hebrew Bible tells Jews to ingather the Jews to Palestine and then to rule from Jerusalem. And the Rothschilds were the motive force behind that movement.
They were following prophecy eventually.
They were artificially fulfilling Jewish messianic prophecy. And the vast majority of Jews opposed this Zionism, because in the Jewish Talmud, in the book of Ketubot, folio 111a, it tells the Jews that they had been dispersed because they were disobedient to God, and that the Jews are not to try to reverse this dispersal until the Messiah comes, and it will be the Messiah who will ingather the Jews. The Jews are also instructed to live in the countries in which they live in the diaspora and to obey the laws of the governments of those countries. And that is why ultra-Orthodox Jews to this day oppose Zionism very strongly, because it contradicts both Deuteronomy chapter 30 and the Talmud in Ketubot, folio 111a, which tells the Jews that they are not to try to use artificial means to fulfill prophecy. But from the Rothschilds' perspective, they saw themselves as the king of the Jews, so therefore they are fulfilling messianic prophecy because they see themselves as the Messiah.
And they do control the banks. The banking industry obviously is in their hands, and
has been for a very long time, and they are good at manipulating debt. When they issue currency, that currency is based upon debt, and they never produce enough currency to be able to run the economy and pay off the debt, so that the economy is forced to create greater and greater debts simply to pay the interest on the debts that have already been created. So they have a system that reaps perpetual gains from the inflation and destruction of the currencies of various nations.
well, the Ottoman Empire was a big empire. It ruled a lot of countries. It oversaw a lot of countries at that time. But why not the Kurds? Why not the Greeks? Why not any other nationality? Why did they select Armenians?
Jews have a religious mythology which tells them that the Armenians are what are known as Amalekites. And in the Hebrew Bible, in the Jewish Kabbalah, and in the Jewish Talmud, and throughout the Jewish oral tradition, the Jews are commanded to exterminate the Amalekites, down to the last man, woman, and child. And in 1 Samuel chapter 15, the Hebrew Bible tells a story where God is outraged that Saul did not kill King Agag, but instead tried to spare him for a human sacrifice to God, because God had commanded them to exterminate all Armenians. And King Saul lost his kingdom on that basis. Now, in the Byzantine Empire, a mythology developed that the Armenians are the Amalekites, which means that the Jews are commanded to exterminate the Armenians. And when I say exterminate, I mean every single Armenian must die, according to Jewish mythology.
That was the order of Talat Pasha, actually.
The orders that Talat Pasha issued for the extermination of the Armenians, in many instances, were almost verbatim quotations from the Old Testament.
And so, can we continue with the Byzantine Empire?
Well, the Byzantine Empire was a Christian empire, and it ruled Constantinople. And that also played into the plans of the Young Turks, because the Greeks felt that they had a right to Macedonia and Thrace, all the way up to Constantinople and even beyond, to reconstitute the Byzantine Empire. And even though Greece obtained its independence, southern Greece obtained its independence in the 1820s, the Zionists and many revolutionary forces prompted the Greeks to spark the Balkan Wars, where Christians and Muslims would be fighting each other for control over Constantinople. And a similar struggle came over Jerusalem, which was under the control of Islam. The Catholics also wanted to control Jerusalem, and of course the Jews wanted to control Jerusalem. And the Jews also wanted to destroy Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem so that they could build a Jewish temple on the site and reinstitute ritual sacrifices.
Animal sacrifices and Temple of Solomon.
Exactly. They feel that in order to gain atonement for their sins, they have to perform ritual sacrifices which are outlined in the Talmud, and they have prepared all the instruments for these sacrifices. They've also prepared the Levitical priests to conduct the sacrifices and to conduct the rituals of the temple. There are many groups, well-financed groups in Israel, who are working ardently to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock so that they can rebuild the temple and fulfill Jewish prophecy.
When you say they prepared Levitic orders, we're talking about schools?
We're talking about a priesthood, the Kohanim. The Jews believed that Aaron, who was Moses' brother, obtained the oral tradition from God on Sinai. And Christians have taken from Judaism the written tradition, the Hebrew Bible. But the Jews believe that Moses was also given what's known as the oral tradition, which he then told to his brother Aaron. And in Jewish legends, Moses supposedly had a speech impediment so that Aaron would often speak for him. And the oral tradition became Pharisaic Judaism, which Jesus Christ strongly opposed. That then evolved into the Talmud. And it is these traditions which are not incorporated into Christianity, which Jews hold most dearly. And they believe that it's the priests, the Levitical priests and the Kohanim, a special group descended directly from Aaron, who must control the temple and perform the sacrifices. So they have looked for Jews with the name Kohen, and they have identified a genetic trait, I believe among the males, of people named Cohen. And this is one of the ways they identify Jewish groups around the world. They're actually black South African Jews who have this genetic marker that identifies a certain percentage of their population. I think it's about 10% of their population are supposedly Kohanim. And they also find Jews in India and Jews in China who have this same genetic marker, which they don't find in other populations. And they have reconstituted the ancient priesthood based on this, because that priesthood was destroyed when Titus destroyed the temple in 70 AD.
That's it's going religious and political. So how can we understand? Is this a religious war, we can say, or does it have anything to do with politics, or are they doing just a prophecy? Apparently, they took from God.
Judaism has aspects that are both political and religious. Much of Jewish literature is descriptions of laws and practices and customs which are political, and which also teach the Jews to insist on laws and practices for non-Jews. So you can't really speak of Judaism as being either political or religious. It's both, and it's strongly both. And the Messiah himself is a political figure. He's a king. It's very different from the Christian perception of the Messiah as Jesus Christ, as the divine presence of God in a human form. In Judaism, the Messiah is instead a political leader who fulfills the political laws of Judaism.
And all these wars are based into the Old Testament, we could say, or Talmud, which they have to do the commandments of their Lord. But there are some rabbis who are against this understanding, and they viciously fight against the Zionism. Zionism, even Zionism, sometimes it's against Jews, interest of Jews.
Many anti-Semitic movements, including Nazism, were instigated by Zionists, because Zionists believe that anti-Semitism is good for the Jews because it keeps the Jews segregated from non-Jews. The greatest fear of Zionists is that Jews will assimilate, that they will marry non-Jews and lose their Jewishness. And Jews teach that this is equivalent to extinction. So they have a hatred of Jews who assimilate, Jews who marry non-Jews and lose their Jewish culture. So there has often been a struggle between Jewish populations and Zionists. But what you're describing particularly is the Satmar Natura Kartai Jews from Hungary, who are ultra-Orthodox Jews who oppose it for the religious reasons I gave. For example, Deuteronomy chapter 30 and the Talmud in the book of Ketubot, folio 111a. But those Jews still hold the Talmudic beliefs that the Jews are a master race, that they are a nation of priests, and that the non-Jews will have to give up all their religion, all their culture, and follow these priests as slaves, and that Israel will be a holy nation. The distinction is that the Shabbataians believe that Shabbatai Tzvi was the Messiah, and that they have had a Messiah ever since, so that they believe they are in the Messianic age, whereas the ultra-Orthodox Jews believe that their Messiah is yet to arrive.
How about the Christian Zionists? What would you say about that? I mean, there are some Christian Armenians who oppose what we're talking about because they say they're chosen people.
Christian Zionism among Armenians is not something that I've studied, but I have studied Christian Zionism in Protestant movements in Germany, England, and America. And it has often been sponsored by people who have been corrupted by the Jewish Kabbalah, like Sir Isaac Newton, the famous physicist, was actually a Kabbalistic Jew, and the famous economist Maynard Keynes described him as a Jewish monotheist of the school of Maimonides. And these people taught Christians that they would have to sacrifice themselves so that biblical prophecy would be fulfilled. And they also taught Christians that there should be revolutions and wars which consume the earth so that God will create a new heaven and a new earth and Jesus Christ will return. But all these movements were financed and promoted by Jews themselves and by crypto-Jews. So it's an artificial movement that greatly damaged Christian theology, which was 1,500 years old when they started to establish the Christian Zionist movement. It's completely opposed to traditional Christian theology, and it has created many mythologies, like the mythology of the rapture, which was created by crypto-Jewish Jesuits who taught Christians that if they start, for example, a nuclear war with Russia, that those Christians who start that war will be lifted up into heaven and the war will be fought. And after the war is fought and humanity is destroyed and Jesus comes down and fights all these wars, there will then be a new utopia where they can come and live, and they'll live in peace. So it's kind of a very selfish belief which leads them into self-destruction, which is also very much what happened to the Armenians. The Armenians were duped by Jews into a form of Armenian Christian Zionism. So I should correct myself. I actually have studied it in the phase of the Armenian genocide, no, not in the phase of modern society. The Armenians were taught that if they helped the Jews by sacrificing themselves, by sacrificing millions of innocent Armenian lives, that this would provoke wars which would break apart the Turkish Empire, and then the Armenians would be able to form their own Armenian Empire after the Turkish Empire was destroyed and partitioned. So again, it was the promise of a utopia after a massive sacrifice and after a great deal of destruction, which would pave the way for a new utopian society.
Could you talk about Reverend Filion, who predicted the genocide in 1895?
I believe that Reverend Filion was actually a traitor, and he made amazingly accurate predictions that could not have been made individually, let alone collectively, without foreknowledge. He predicted the overthrow of Kaiser Wilhelm II. He predicted the overthrow of Sultan Abdul Hamid II, and he predicted the overthrow of the Russian Tsar. All of these things were amazing predictions which he made in 1895. And he also predicted in 1895, though there were Armenian massacres going on, he predicted that millions of Armenians would be killed. He also predicted that there would be a Jewish Holocaust. And he justified these things as if they were good things, because he said that this would lead to the War of the Apocalypse, which was the First World War. It was often referred to there as the war to end all wars, the War of the Apocalypse. And he said that at the conclusion of this war, there would be an Armenian nation formed, and that all Christian nations would bless the Armenians who had sacrificed themselves, and that the Armenians would become the new chosen people.
So those were prediction or prophecies, he said, you think?
He specifically said that he was making predictions and not prophecies. He said that these were things that he knew. He expressed himself somewhat cryptically, but it was very clear that he had foreknowledge. He must have been associated with the people who initiated these plans.
Mr. Bjerknes, since we have only 5 more minutes left, tomorrow's meeting is very important. Could you elaborate on the points that you are going to talk about before we finish this tonight?
The most significant thing I would like people to come away with from my presentation is that the Armenian genocide happened. It was not caused by Turks or by Muslims, but it was caused by crypto-Jewish Dernmei and by Jewish financiers who had a Zionist agenda to establish the state of Palestine as a Jewish colony. I also would like people to realize the political motivations for the cover-up, which is taking place and which has taken place for 92 years of the Armenian genocide. And I want them to ask questions. I don't ask them to accept everything that I say on face value. I ask them to investigate it, and I hope that they do, because it's going to lead to more and more evidence and new facts which prove beyond any doubt that what I say is true.
On tomorrow night at 7:30, we will have the lecture, and you're prepared. Thank you for coming to Los Angeles from Chicago for one day tomorrow, and hopefully a lot of people will come and listen to you. If you have a few more words to say for your last words before we close the program.
My last words would be to the Armenian community that you have a right to demand that the truth be told about your history, and to not be intimidated by people who are going to try to smear your leaders for telling the truth. I would also humbly suggest to the Armenians that there is a political crisis in Armenia today, where Armenia is being led into conflict with its neighbors, chiefly Turkey, and that this is not going to help Armenia survive demographically or economically, and that by learning the truth, you can begin to heal the wounds which exist between Turkey and Armenia and create better society both for Armenia and for Turkey. So this will lead to a very positive outcome, as it should. And also to remember that this is simply the truth. There's no shame in telling the truth. In fact, you can come to understand what has happened and why you're in the situation you are in by making a historical critical analysis of what happened during the fall of the Turkish Empire and the motivations of those who perpetrated this great crime against you. And you can also learn many important political lessons from the cover-up which is taking place to try to hide these political facts, because you can see from the motivations of these forces how they're trying to bring Armenia into another disaster. And you can prevent it, and once these truths gain momentum, you will be standing on the side of the victors, and you will be standing on the side of right. So have courage and face it with courage, and realize that you're ultimately going to win this fight.
Thank you very much for coming and sharing your thoughts with our audience. Սիրելի արնագիստներ, որովհետև մեր ժամը հասավ իր ավարտին, բոլորդ հրավիրված եք վաղը երեկոյան 333 East Colorado Boulevard ժամը 7:30 Baron Bjerknes Christopher պիտի ունենա այս հետաքրքիր lecture-ը public, որ բոլորիս կարևոր է գիտնալ իր ըրած research-ը եւ ճշմարտությունները, որ պիտի դա մեր բոլորին։ Ուրեմն բոլորի ուշադրությունը կարևոր է եւ որ ներկա լագ այդտեղը։ Հրավիրված եք բոլորդ լսելու եւ բոլորս իրար հետ սորվելու։ Եվ այնտեղը պիտի լա հարցի ժամ կրնակ ծեր հարցումները տալ իր lecture-ին վերջ։ Ուրեմն որովհետեւ մեր ժամը հասավ իր ավարտին, միջև քաշապատ Աստված ցես հետ։ Հարի երեկո սիրելի արնագիստներ, ինչպես ամեն 3 շաբթի երեկո կմիանանք ուղի եթերով, հավասիկ պիտի շարունակենք մեր հաղորդաշարը այսօր։ Այսօր պիտի խոսենք շատ կարևոր նման կարևոր նյութի մասին, ինչպես անցյալ 2-3 շաբաթները խոսանք եւ ունեցանք lecture-ը Baron Christopher Jon Bjerknes-ի հետ միևս պիտի խոսենք ասվերջի անձրաթարսերու մասին եւ իր դեղեցություններու մասին, որպես հիստորիան եւ որպես իր ժուրնալիզմի խաղապարը պիտի դա մեզի պիտի բացատրե վերջի իրավարդարսերու մասին պիտի անգլերեն լեզվով բացատրվի, ուրեմն որովհետև ինքը քիծի վրա է երկար ժամանակ պիտի չառնեմ իրեն ներկայացնելու, որով շատերուս արդեն ներկայացած ենք։ Իսկ պիտի ունենանք հյուրը եկող շաբաթ, այս շաբաթ պիտի խոսեր Ted Pike-ը, որովհետև emergency ուրիշ գործոմը քնած եկող 3 շաբթի պիտի ունենանք Ted Pike, Reverend Ted Pike, շատ կարևոր անձնավորություն է, որ նորեն պիտի խոսի ADL-ի վերաբերյալ։ Good evening, Christopher. How are you?
Very good, Bedros. How are you?
Praise the Lord. We welcome you again one more time this week.
We had a good gathering. The lecture that you gave, there is a good response, and thank you again one more time for coming and giving us your knowledge. I would like to start the interview today with the very important question. The last minute of your lecture, you stated few words which was not very much understood by some people. Would you elaborate on that, the meaning about the Turks?
I believe you're referring to when I suggested that Armenia's future will be improved if there's a rapprochement between the Turks and the Armenians. Right. And I think many people misconstrued that to mean that I was trying to claim that the Turks don't have any culpability for what happened and that there should be no reparations. And that's not at all what I meant. There should be reparations, and the Turks are certainly culpable for what happened, as are the Kurds and as are the Jews. And I would like that to be very clear. The Turks were involved in murdering the Armenians, as were the Kurds, and the plan and the leadership, the orchestration, the financing, as Sir Gerard Lothar, British ambassador to the Turkish Empire, put it, the Jews were the brains behind it, and the Turks were the military behind it.
So that's pretty much, we wanted to clarify that, because we are Armenians, we do hold the Turks the mostly responsible party also. Coming to the latest, whatever is going on around the country, I would like you to give your opinion on, your research opinion on ADL.
The ADL has taken some very bizarre stances on the Armenian genocide, which are confusing, especially to the broader worldwide Jewish community, which is having a very difficult time understanding why Abraham Foxman is doing and saying what he's doing and saying. And initially, he was hesitant to use the word genocide in the context of the Armenian genocide, I think preferring to call it a massacre. And also, he has stated that he doesn't believe that the U.S. Congress should pass resolutions recognizing the genocide, which strikes many Jews as very odd, that there should be this form of denial of what's taking place. And Foxman has since, I believe today, stated that he will call it genocide, but he's still pushing the idea that somehow Turkish Jews are in jeopardy if the United States Congress recognizes historical facts as it should.
So he is willing to use the word genocide on what terms? Can you explain? What is the motive behind it?
Well, I think he got clobbered. Everybody confronted him with the idea that what he's doing is ridiculous and hypocritical. And there were Jewish groups calling for his resignation, and it was scandalous what has been occurring. And the people of Watertown, Massachusetts, said that they would no longer participate in the ADL's No Place for Hate campaign because the ADL had taken this stance on the Armenian genocide. And there was a meeting of the town council where they voted to cease their participation in this program. And I believe other towns, Salem and Newton perhaps, have also started to question whether they should be involved with the ADL. And one of the men who was the regional director for the ADL asked that the national body change its stance, and I believe he was fired by the national center of the ADL. And then I think two others resigned in protest against that firing.
And go ahead, I'm sorry.
And as a result of all this, Foxman has wisely begun to use the word genocide, but he inexplicably continues to say that the ADL will not support a congressional resolution on this issue, and that, well, let me read what he said. We continue to firmly believe that a congressional resolution on such matters is a counterproductive diversion and will not foster reconciliation between Turks and Armenians, and may put at risk the Turkish-Jewish community and important multilateral relationship between Turkey, Israel, and the United States, close quote. Now, he's got some explaining to do. In what sense will it put the Turkish-Jewish community at risk? And in what sense is it a threat to American, Turkish-Israeli relations, to tell the truth?
So we can simply say that Mr. Foxman can deny or is against the genocide as we speak, and making some excuses. He just wants to pat some people in the back.
Well, it's a strangely contradictory stance he's taking. On the one hand, he himself is acknowledging that it's genocide. On the other hand, he's claiming that it's counterproductive for the Congress to do the same that he has done. And that's ludicrous. There's nothing counterproductive about telling the truth. If there's to be rapprochement between Turkey and Armenia, the Turks have to acknowledge the history.
So which means he's still taking the same stand.
Absolutely, he's still taking the same stance. He's playing games with semantics, but on a political level, he hasn't changed anything.
In the term, what does Mr. Foxman or ADL really represent? Why is it so important? His voice is so important.
Because the Jewish community is deeply involved in American politics. And there's a new book coming out by Mearsheimer and Walt called The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy. And it is well known that an ADL's position on a candidate can make or break that candidate in the political arena.
So basically,
being the prime example.
You're trying to say they can elect a candidate and they can throw a candidate out?
That's the record that they've developed, that when the ADL goes against a candidate, it's very serious business for that political candidate. So that when the ADL takes this kind of a stance on a congressional issue, there's a tacit implication that if a candidate votes for this resolution, they don't have the backing of the ADL. And we have testimony from Paul Findley, who was a congressman in Illinois, in his book, They Dare to Speak Out, of how destructive that can be to a politician's career. Senator Charles Percy in Illinois also came into problems when he went against the Israel lobby. So it's very serious business for a politician. The ADL has a lot of power, and with that power comes great responsibility. And I think that what they're doing in terms of the Armenian genocide is unfair, hypocritical, and there's got to be more to it than is on the surface, and they should be confronted with these issues. And they should be asked why they're doing this. And they should be asked by the Armenian government and by Armenian leaders if they are aware of the fact that the Young Turks, the leadership of the Young Turks who called for, planned, and executed the extermination of the Armenian people were Jews and were pursuing a Jewish agenda. They were pursuing Judaism. They were pursuing Zionism, and they were financed by Jews, and it was part of a Jewish banker's plan to disrupt, overthrow, and then partition the Turkish Empire. And I think Foxman ought to be confronted with these facts. He ought to be asked if he's aware of these facts. I think the Israeli government ought to be confronted with these facts and asked what their stance is on this and if there's any ethnic bias going on in here. Because these people, if they are aware of these facts, have an interest that is beyond what appears to be on the surface. And if they're not aware of these facts, they should be made aware of these facts and condemn what happened.
What can we do in order to change the political situation where a candidate doesn't have to depend on ADL?
I think the ADL is doing a very good job itself of creating a situation where a candidate doesn't have to depend on the ADL. If Foxman continues down this path, he's going to have no credibility at the end of his journey. I think the people of Watertown, Pennsylvania, the Armenian community, have given us a perfect example of what needs to be done. People need to stand up, they need to organize, they need to form a cohesive political voice and express it. And when the ADL does something outrageous, as the ADL has done in terms of the Armenian genocide, people have to get together, speak out against it, and throw the ADL out.
Together we need to go to throw ADL out anyways, because they've done more destructive work than anything good for humanity. We can read it on Ted Pike's page about the ADL itself, how destructive it is for humanity. But in any way, I would like to ask you this question: where did ADL come from?
It's a strange story. The B'nai B'rith, which grew out of Freemasonry, became a purely Jewish branch of Freemasonry.
The one that was founded in 1913, you mean?
That's when the ADL was formed. I think B'nai B'rith came about around 1843, something like that. And then in 1913, one of the local Jewish directors of B'nai B'rith, named Leo Frank, raped and murdered a 13-year-old girl named Mary Fagan, Phagan, and he was put on trial for the crime. And since he was a B'nai B'rith leader, B'nai B'rith formulated the Anti-Defamation League as a pressure group to put pressure on the media and the community to free Leo Frank, who had murdered this young girl.
To free the rapist, basically.
They were successful in influencing the press, but the man was ultimately convicted and then lynched for the murder. And his lawyers were very racist and tried to pin the crime on a black janitor who had been working in the building where Frank was the manager. I think it was a pencil factory. And they tried to pin the murder on him, and Frank got him to forge letters allegedly written by the girl. And it was a very scandalous trial, and it was very shameful things that happened and very racist things that happened. And at that time, they tried to turn their racism around on the community and say that this poor man who had murdered this girl was being persecuted because he was a Jew. And that's nonsense. He was a rapist and a murderer.
In the United States, they will put them in prison. But in some countries...
This was the United States, and it was in the South, and...
yeah, that's why they put them in prison.
That was the formation of the ADL in America in 1913. That's the history of it.
So ADL came from B'nai B'rith.
Yes. It was an outgrowth of B'nai B'rith and an outgrowth of the murder trial of a local director of a B'nai B'rith leader.
And about B'nai B'rith, does it have any connection with the Young Turks?
I've seen things. I've seen claims that if you look at the records of B'nai B'rith, you can see that some of the Young Turks came from that organization or had contacts with people who came from that organization. I've never tried or had means to verify any of that, but I have seen those claims.
How about ADL? Does it have any connection with the Young Turks?
Not as far as I know. ADL has a connection with World Jewry, and in that sense, it had a connection with the Young Turks. As far as in the distant past, when these atrocities were going on, I'm not aware that the ADL ever tried to cover them up. But there would have been no need for them to cover it up because the Jewish connection to the Young Turks was not well known in America. And the Turks in the First World War were vilified for what they did. So the ADL or other Jewish groups, if they sought to represent Zionist Jewish interests, would have had an incentive to expose those crimes because those crimes were used to bring the United States into a war against the Turkish Empire. That's why you had Henry Morgenthau lobbying the American government with information about what was taking place in the Turkish Empire. But he left out a very critical fact that was involved in all this, and that fact was that the Young Turks were Jewish. The leadership were Jewish.
So what has been the response in the Jewish community in large?
To the ADL, the response of the Jewish community is, how dare you? How dare you treat this crime against humanity in this way, with this kind of cavalier, flippant attitude, and try to make something political out of something which is a concern of all human beings. It's very important that genocides be acknowledged and understood, and that every detail of the facts of those genocides be recorded, so that these things not happen again, and so that the criminals who are responsible for it have a culpability, and that there is this deterrence to it. Because one of the phases of genocide is denial, and we have the Jewish leadership in denial of what Jewish leaders did at the time of the genocide, and that's an atrocity, and the Jewish community is repulsed by it.
You've been following the news, and you have a blog. Could you be kind enough to give your website again one more time so people can read the daily blogs?
If you go to JewishRacism.com, Jewish Racism as if it's one word, .com, there is a link that links to my blog, which is JewishRacism.blogspot.com. And I try to provide helpful information about how this issue is proceeding in the mass media and in the political arena.
Obviously, it has made a big noise all over the world, because all the news medias are writing. Some of them are mainstream medias, but I haven't seen it on CNN or other newses. Are they under control of the same powers, or can we talk about it?
Well, I would say CNN has a very heavy Zionist bias, as does Fox News. I've seen Associated Press cover it, and the issue is getting bigger. I hope that Waterton continues to put pressure on the ADL to not take half measures and to go all the way and pressure Congress to recognize this genocide. But you have to ask yourself, why is the ADL interjecting itself into this issue in the first place? And I think that we have to get a dialogue going with the ADL, and they have to be forthcoming, and there has to be an exchange, and we have to query them and ask them, are you aware of the Jewish involvement in this crime? And will you acknowledge it? And will you help to make reparations to the Armenian people for this crime? This crime should be treated exactly as the Jewish Holocaust was treated, with the same reverence and respect for the Armenian lives that were lost as is shown to the Jewish lives that were lost. And that hasn't happened from the ADL yet. And I would also add from the American Jewish Committee and AIPAC. They have got to treat this as the Nazi Holocaust is treated.
Can we talk about the issue of AIPAC and Israeli lobby? What are
They're very powerful.
What are their stands?
Control of their.
What are their stands?
I would say that the Jewish lobby in America brought us into war in Iraq, that the American people are culpable for the genocide that we have committed against the Iraqis, and that you can see a very strong parallel between what has happened to the American people and to the Iraqis by the control of Zionist Jews over the political sphere that happened in the Ottoman Empire when the Jewish Young Turks took over the Ottoman Empire politically and caused the Turkish people to commit mass murder against the Armenians. The American people are doing the same thing under the direction of the same forces, and we share the same type of culpability for what we're doing. And it's got to stop, because this is growing and growing quickly, and we have American politicians who are under the control of the Jewish lobby and who have pledged at Herzliya and in other places to support this effort, not by common Jewish people, but by terribly corrupt Jewish leadership to bring America into war against the Iranian people and ultimately against the Syrians and the Russians. And this is highly serious, very dangerous things that are going on. And the American American people have to wake up to it. Because the people of Watertown have woken up.
Absolutely, but Watertown has woken up, and the small voice has done big damage. How we should
Isn't that
all wake
amazing?
up.
Isn't it amazing how that one small little town council, by simply asserting the truth and demanding justice, has shaken up the whole political arena of the United States? I think it's the American people.
It's an example to all politicians, actually, that swear and take an oath to serve the people, and when they start serving, most of them, I'm not saying all of them obviously, but most of them forget their oath and they start serving this kind of powers, unfortunately. It should be an example to all politicians who have to give an answer to God one day, obviously.
Well, what we have to do is set an example that they can get elected if they stand up against the ADL, for example, or take a position against AIPAC. And that example has not been set yet. On the contrary, these forces have shown what power they have and what domination they have over the media and political financing. The Jewish community is heavily involved in financing political campaigns and in the media. There's just no denying it. It's a fact. And we have to organize, because no matter which ethnic group it was, that is such a small ethnic group, to have that kind of predominance in the political arena is dangerous. It's undemocratic. It's tyrannical. And we have seen the danger that this tyranny leads to. When the Young Turks took over, they started committing genocide against people. When the Bolshevik Jews took over Russia, they started committing genocide against people, and they killed tens of millions of people. And now these same forces are leading America to commit genocides across the Middle East, and they're calling for nuclear war, which is the most horrific of all genocides and the most cowardly. And they're really pushing for it. It's an open fact.
One more thing, I would like you to present to our audience about AIPAC. Does it side with the genocide, or is it again? First, before I ask you that question, genocide is a word. If they recognize it or not, to me, it has to be solved. Our land has to be returned to us, and they need to be paid restitution. But we're talking on a political phase right now. How about AIPAC? Are they working against just like ADL?
My understanding is that AIPAC has taken a stance similar to the ADL, as had the American Jewish Committee. But I saw today a press release by David A. Harris, Executive Director of the American Jewish Committee, where that stance is changing. So what Watertown has done has had a good effect, and we shouldn't try to ridicule when people are doing positive things. We should encourage it. But it's got to go all the way. This resolution has to be passed, and in the process of that change, we have to get these people to respond to our questions about whether or not they are aware of the Jewish involvement in this issue. That's got to be a key part of it.
How can somebody that is staunch fighter against the word genocide or recognition of genocide all of a sudden in one day change his word and not hide his feelings?
I think that when they do, they should not be attacked for doing it. And I think the reason it happened was because the Jewish community came out against them. And the Jewish community at large is their base upon whom they depend for their power. Mm-hmm. Without the support of the general Jewish community, they're nothing. And that's why I'm so strongly petitioning the Jewish community to learn this history and become aware of these facts. Because when the Armenian genocide began, when the Young Turks first took over the Ottoman Empire, the British press called upon the Jews of England to tell the Jews of the Ottoman Empire to stop killing Christians. And they warned these Jews that there would be a backlash against all Jews if world Jewry did not condemn this murder of Christians by the Zionist Jews. And that took place in 1911. There was a series of correspondence in the London Times where they were calling upon the Jewish community to put an end to this mass murder. Now, that was 4 years before the Jewish Young Turks mass murdered 1.5 million people. And instead of coming to the aid of these Christians, the Jewish community in England ridiculed those people who were begging the Jewish community to stop this murder. So that Jewish community in England shares in the culpability for what happened to the Armenian people. And the Jewish community in America shares in the culpability for what is happening to the people of Iraq. And we have got to get the Jewish community in America, most of whom are decent people, to take a stand, and many of them have, don't get me wrong, many of them have been the most vocal in taking a stand against this push from the Jewish community to wage nuclear war against Iran, which is insanity.
The other question, which is, again, the Israeli lobby that you were talking about earlier, has it changed its views?
The Israeli lobby is a political force, and it has to live with political realities. Now, it has been a spoiled political force that has had its way for a very long time. But ever since Israel attacked Lebanon in the Second Lebanese War, and ever since the Iraqi war has gone sour, and ever since almost all the voices you hear calling out for war against Iran are either Jewish voices or those who have been paid off by wealthy Jews, the American people are starting to wise up to what has taken place. And the Israeli lobby has to face that political reality. And the arrogance of Abraham Foxman in confronting the people of Waterton and their reasonable requests, I think, came as a shock to the entire political climate of the United States. And it's really an amazing event that has taken place. And I think it should serve as an example to the entire American people that we have got to take a stand and defend our interests in spite of what these very wealthy people are doing to corrupt our society. And when I talk about those people, I'm talking about the Zionists who control the media and the neoconservative Zionists who control the Bush administration.
Would you assume that we should put our guards down because they recognize he used the word genocide, or should we fight harder right now?
For him to use the word genocide and at the same time to say that he doesn't want the Congress to pass this resolution.
That's hypocritical. That's hypocrisy.
It's worse than hypocrisy. It's an insult to the intelligence and the dignity of the American people and the Armenian people. It's a slap in the face. It's saying, I'll toss you a bone, now shut up.
Absolutely. You're right on that one. The next question I would like to get into, how about the Turks, the government of Turkey? We're talking about the politics in the United States, ADL and Israeli lobby. What about Turks?
Well, the Turks are intimately involved in American politics. They have some hired lobbyists, Bob Livingston being one of them, and Dick Gephardt being another, and I think there's another, his name escapes me at the moment. But they pay them very large sums
Hastert?
to try to buy.
You're talking about Hastert?
No, there was another name. I don't have it. I wasn't aware that Hastert was involved in that.
I believe Livingston had a video comments 3-4 weeks ago talking against the genocide and asking his people not to recognize the genocide.
And Hastert got involved in that?
I don't know. I'm not talking about Hastert. I'm talking about Bob Livingston.
Yes, absolutely. Livingston put out a video calling on behalf of the Turkish government for the Congress to not pass these resolutions. and it was a silly video. There was a
What is his interest? What is his gain? Let's put it this way.
well, he's a former congressman, I believe, who was ousted during the Clinton administration in some sort of a scandal and became a lobbyist, and he's performing his job. That's his job. He's paid by the Turkish government to lobby, and that's what he's doing.
So his gain is money. Let's put it this way. He's exchanging our forefathers who were massacred, who were killed brutally, for his money. So his pocket is larger. His pocket speaks out. So can we continue about Turkey again?
People should understand that the anomaly of Turkey being a predominantly Muslim country and at the same time having wonderful relations with Israel as Israel commits genocide against Palestinian Muslims is explained by the fact that ever since the Young Turks, who were crypto-Jews, Dernme Jews, took over the Turkish Empire, they've had a never-ending string of control over the Turkish nation. And Ataturk destroyed the Turkish Empire and made the Turks anti-imperialist, and in the name of Turkish pride made it a singular country. And ever since then, the military has taken over his role to keep Turkey a secular country, a nationalistic country, and a country completely under the control of Dernme Jews.
How many percent is it?
Percent of Dernme Jews in Turkey, very small. I would even hesitate to guess, but I would assume under 1%.
And they control a country of 80 million?
Yes. Very minute but extremely powerful percent. And that's why I have to laugh when ADL and others say that the poor Jews are going to be overwhelmed by the terrible Turks. If this genocide issue, well, that's not what he said, but that's what I'm saying. If this issue of the genocide history is recognized, it's ridiculous.
Why would they be overwhelmed? That's the part I don't understand.
I don't understand it either. Jews should have as much obligation as everyone else on earth to tell the truth, and the Jews in Turkey should tell the truth. And
especially ADL, who's anti-hate, and they're against genocides, and they're against massacres, they're against insulting gays. I guess gay people have more rights than Armenians who were massacred or killed brutally, let's say.
The fact that they are taking an historical issue and politicizing it when it doesn't concern them to begin with is very odd, and it strikes many people as very odd. And we have to ask them if they're aware of the issue that the Young Turk leadership was Jewish. We should contact Abraham Foxman and query him on this issue. We should ask him directly, and it shouldn't be just us, it should be the Armenian government. We should ask him, are you aware of the ethnic and religious origins of the leadership of the Young Turks who attempted to exterminate the Armenian people under their control?
The answer is going to be no, but obviously he knows it, yes.
Well, let's ask him. Let's see what he says. And then let's begin a dialogue on that issue. And I think that's what will ultimately lead to the Jewish community at large becoming aware of this history and waking up to the realities of what Zionist power has done and the terrible crimes that have been committed by Zionist power throughout the history of the Zionist movement.
So we're talking about the 1% of Dome Jews who are in control of Turkey. What kind of a power they have in order to put a control over 80 million Muslims? And Muslims of Turkey are staunch believers in them.
Yes, they are, and they were made that way under a series of dictatorships.
Especially Ataturk.
Absolutely. Ataturk became a cult of personality figure like Stalin.
And he killed the fanatical Muslims. He
closed a couple of masjids down, I believe.
He changed the whole nature of Turkish society and made Turks proud to destroy themselves. He destroyed their empire. He destroyed their culture. He destroyed their religion, and he even went so far as to change from Arabic script to Latin characters with little features added to them to allow them to transliterate from one script to the other.
And the next dictator continued the same way, I believe. And until today,
well, there's always been a military junta, as someone described it to me, which has overseen whoever is the political face of the Turkish Empire. Just as in the very beginning, behind the official government, there was the Committee of Union and Progress, which was the real power behind the throne. The military of Turkey has taken over that role and is the power behind the throne, and has taken out leaders of which it disapproved, and threatens to take out the new leadership which is going to come in, which is more Islamic.
So I'm going to come to the...
So this is a very, very important issue.
Yeah, I'm coming to the very important question right now. Is that the group that is writing letters to ADL not to recognize the Armenian genocide?
I would have no way of knowing that. I do know that this group has a profound interest in keeping their secrecy secret. They have existed as a secret subculture for hundreds of years, and their power is dependent upon the maintenance of that secrecy. And I do know that that group in Turkey has a very strong interest in the story that we're telling not getting out. That's why I think that the Israeli government and the Turkish government and the ADL should be asked if they are aware of these facts. And I would say that the Armenian government should be the one to make forward these letters, these inquiries to these people, and they should at the same time issue press releases stating that they have released these letters. And then let's see what the response is.
I don't think it's going to
Now, the Armenian government should not do this in an aggressive way. It should do this in a way of trying to come to grips and understand with what is happening. Armenians have a right to protect their security, their heritage, and their future. And the Armenians have a right to ask the Israeli government and the ADL and the Turkish government why these terrible things are taking place, which are an insult to the dignity and the security of the Armenian people. That's the role of the Armenian government, is to protect the dignity and security of Armenians.
I'm sure you know of some Armenian leaders, not some Armenian leaders. Most Armenian leaders knew the Young Turk and Ittihadis and Union of Progress. They knew the history of it, but they haven't come publicly, even historians. What would you say about that?
It's troubling, and it prompts many questions. It prompts the questions of, have there been people who have come out about it who have been silenced? It also prompts the question of, what are they so afraid of? And it prompts many questions. Who are they beholden to? Who controls them? Why is there such fear? And why is there no discussion? Whenever this issue comes up, it results in defamations and smear campaigns, but the issue itself is never allowed to come to the forefront and be openly discussed without intimidation and without defamations and without smear campaigns. It's a historical issue. It should be discussed as a historical issue. Personality should be left out of it. And if there's nothing to hide, why are they trying to hide it?
Christopher, we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to put a dialogue on this last 15 minutes, a resemblance of what happened 92 years ago in Western Armenia. I won't say Turkey because I don't recognize it. Just like some people don't recognize some countries, I don't recognize the state of Turkey. It was our land. But I would like to put a resemblance. Let's put the United States do you see the same resemblance in the United States? Powers behind, small number of domes who are running the country, and we're looking up for another genocide in the United States.
Exactly the same thing is happening. The interests of the American people are being subverted in favor of the interests of Zionist Jews who are bringing America into war and into debt, who are destroying the American image around the world, who are leading us towards an economic clash and a world war. These are the exact same things that were happening when World War I was being prepared by the Balkan Wars and by other things.
Just like
they openly call for World War III, and the American people are being led to a irrational hatred of Muslim people by Zionist Jews to dehumanize Muslim people and to lead Americans to commit further genocides against Muslim peoples and to tolerate the Israeli genocide of the Palestinian people. This is a horrific crime in which the American people are participating against our own interests.
By being
it's going
brainwashed.
on because our politicians are controlled by these people and are intimidated by these people. So God bless the people of Watertown, Massachusetts for standing up against that kind of power.
What should people of the United States do? Because I hear many Christian evangelists who are, they call themselves Zionists.
That's the exact same thing that was going on with the Armenian Church and the Armenian revolutionary parties, primarily the Tashnaks, when the Armenian genocide was being prepared. They sided with their enemies.
Unknowingly.
They believed that they would gain redemption and gain a utopic society if they helped Zionist Jews to commit genocide, to provoke a world war, and to redraw the borders of the Middle East. And that's precisely what the Zionist Jews are up to today. They have subverted the evangelical Christian churches and subverted Christian theology and have given these Christians a utopian vision that if they promote World War III and commit nuclear genocide against the Russians and against the Muslims, that they will be raptured into heaven and that Jesus will come down and create an earthly kingdom.
Well, they have an explanation that they're chosen people and we have to support them. It's
they believe
different
that
dialogue.
Anything against a Jew or against Israel, they will be cursed, and that if they bless every Jew and bless Israel, no matter what it does, that they will be themselves blessed. And
I saw in a documentary on CNN today, actually, about the same topic we're talking about, evangelicals who are blind, and they're leading their people in blind ways, unfortunately.
Well, Armenian traitors did the same thing to the Armenian people, and look at what happened to them. 1.5 million of them were slaughtered. They had a short, little, temporary nation, which was immediately subverted by the same forces. The Bolshevik Jews took over the Armenian Republic, so they were under the same control of the Jewish bankers as they were when the Turks controlled them. And this slow genocide and wearing away of Armenian culture took place that had been taking place before. And this is what is happening to the United States. We're being Bolshevized. We're losing our rights. Our media is controlled. Our media does not report on international news. Our travel is being restricted.
Isn't the front fighter for all this? Isn't the front fighter for all this ADL again? Losing the rights?
I wouldn't say that. I would say that the ADL is a representative of organized Jewry, and it has as its mission the promotion of Jewish interests. Now, if we go beyond that, we have to get specific and specifically identify what it is you're talking about.
We're talking about the hate crime bills that they're trying to pass all over. We're talking about...
the hate crime bills I view as very dangerous to our civil liberties, and I do believe that the ADL is involved in trying to institute hate crimes laws. And I do think that hate crimes laws represent the Bolshevization of America, that if we enable people to determine what thoughts we can and cannot have and what expressions we can and cannot make,
that's
we
not
have
democracy.
lost our dignity as human beings and our ability to defend ourselves from corrupt government. and that is highly dangerous. We always have to have the ability to defend ourselves from corrupt government, or else we're going to be led into concentration camps and extermination camps. It has happened every time that that's taken place in history. When politicians have impunity against their actions against the people, they turn against the people and they begin to commit genocide against the people. And we have to protect ourselves from that. And shame on the ADL for sponsoring hate crimes laws.
They sponsor hate crime laws and all this. In the church, you cannot preach certain, because it becomes a hate crime if you express the Bible, if you teach the Bible. On the other hand, some Zionist
wouldn't
Christians...
put words in the ADL's mouth, but we have the example of what has taken place in Canada.
Absolutely. Some pastors are going to prison for it.
Yes, that when they preach the literal word of the Old Testament and the New Testament, I think in Leviticus and
especially New Testament,
Romans perhaps,
right,
it speaks out against homosexuality, and when they repeat those verses, they place themselves in legal jeopardy.
They go to prison or they go to educational classes, and
I think they're initially fined, and if they persist, they're in jeopardy of the loss of their liberty. But I'm no expert on that issue. But I don't know that ADL is pushing for that specifically, but that is the process that took place in Canada, that there were similar laws to what the ADL is pushing for that led to that kind of an environment.
It was the ADL. It was the same organization again, which works all around the world to protect, but they don't protect themselves, they try to protect the evil, unfortunately, and evil doings. So what should us, Armenians in the United States, expect?
I think Armenians in the United States should demand answers to important questions and demand to be treated equitably to the way that Jews are treated in regard to the Armenian Holocaust and the Jewish Holocaust. And that I think that the Armenians have a good ally in the broader Jewish community who is waking up to the fact that they are being misrepresented by people who don't stand for the same things that they in general stand for. And if there can be a combination of decent Jews and decent Armenians, it could change our entire future and create many new wonderful opportunities and put an end to this march towards World War III. And I hope and pray that that is what is the fruit of this wonderful awakening that has taken place in Watertown, Massachusetts.
So, Christopher, what should Armenians do for the statements that Mr. Foxman stated in the news press today, August 21st, or yesterday? He wants to recognize the word genocide, but he still wants to fight against recognition of genocide in the Congress. How should the Armenian community react?
Mr. Foxman has advised Armenians and Turks to get together and dialogue. I think he should follow his own advice with the Armenian community and meet with Armenian leaders in an open public forum that is televised or recorded. And there should be a discussion to hash out why he precisely is taking this position. And he should respond directly to the Armenian community's concerns. And there should be a discussion about it. And it should be an open discussion so that this issue can get resolved in the best interests of everyone involved. And if that doesn't happen, then there should be the strongest condemnation of what is taking place from all sides. And I think that you'll find a good ally in the broader Jewish community in issuing that condemnation.
Also, we're almost coming to the end of our interview, actually. First of all, I'd like to thank you for staying up late and explaining what's been going around lately to the Armenian community in your views. Could you say in few words for your final opinion?
First, I want to thank the Armenian community for the wonderful reception I received in Glendale, California. And I would also like to thank the Armenian community of Watertown, Massachusetts for showing us all the way to a civilized and productive resolution of these issues. And I would say that it's shown us all hope of how easy it is, really, to take our country back from these forces, and how simple it is. All we have to do is tell the truth and demand justice.
And what would you say to the politicians of, besides Watertown, the rest of the country?
I would say to them that they are responsible to us, and that if honest men and women come forward and have the dignity and the decency to tell the truth and to fight for justice, that the American community will support them. And then we have to prove that to them, and we have to support them financially, we have to support them with organization. And it's something we have to do quickly, because we have presidential candidates who are openly asserting that they're going to bring us into war with Iran. And war with Iran means World War III, which means that we, as humanity, are risking the extermination of the human race. And this simple little event in Watertown shows us the way. And we should observe it, learn from it, and act quickly.
Do you think any presidential candidate is capable of changing the situation?
I don't think the presidential candidates can do anything until the American people change the situation. It has to come
so it's
from
not
the
on one
American
person.
people, and we can change it. We can change it. For example, if we were to impeach Bush and Cheney, or to take some organized action that shows these forces that we will not stand for it, they will be forced to recognize that political reality. We don't have to get somebody who's completely honest or completely on our side. We simply have to show these forces that we won't stand for it, and it will end, and then we can start taking steps to regain complete control.
Well, thank you very much for your precious time and giving us your opinion, what's been going on around, because I've read it every day on your blog. You have yesterday you wrote about 3 different articles, I believe. And can you say one more time what is the website so people can read the blog that you write?
At the website JewishRacism.com. Jewish racism, as if it's one word, no spaces, no hyphens, just JewishRacism.com. You can get a link to my blog. You can also get a link to my book called The Jewish Genocide of Armenian Christians. It's a 575-page book which you can download for free as a PDF file.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I've enjoyed it a great deal, and I think it's been a productive discussion once again.
And this interview will be on your website pretty soon, hopefully. Thank you very much for your time, and I will talk to you later.
Thank you, Bedros.
Thank you. Ուրեմն որովհետև մեր ժամը իր ավարտին հասավ, ինչպես Քրիստոֆեր Ջոն Բյորքնսը խոսեցավ մեզ հետ եւ վերջի իրադարձերու մասին խոսավ, հետաքրքիր ինտերվյուում էր, իր խաղապարները ավելի ճիշտ է գրնակ այս իր խաղապարները ստանալ, այս ինտերվյուն տեսնալ իր վեբսայթի վրա։ Իսկ այդ հարցի վերաբերյալ, որ առաջին վարյանին ինքը փասադրեց, շատ հստակորեն փասադրեց, որ թուրքերն ալ հանցանք ունին հավասար երի թուրքերը։ So այդ խոսակցությունները, որ շատերու լեզվի վրա գերտա իրենք շատերը անհասկանալի դեղը գտնեն, հավասիկ ծեր պատասխանը ստացակ եւ ճշմարտությունը այս է, ուրեմն լավ լսենք եւ լավ բարձենք, որովհետեւ մեր ժամը վերջացավ այսօր, միջև քաշապատ Աստված ցեզ հետ։